Good evening, everyone. Seeing that we have a quorum present, I would like to call this special board meeting to order and acknowledge that we are meeting tonight from many locations in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Nation. And I would like to thank the Algonquin peoples for hosting us on their land and recognize their enduring presence. We have an agenda before us, and so I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda, please. Trustee Lyra, seconded by Trustee Ellis. Is there any discussion on the agenda? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please. And opposed? And that motion is carried. We called this meeting specially this evening, in part at the request of 6 trustees in accordance with provision in our bylaws allowing trustees to ask to have a meeting called. I will have to say, however, that whether or not we would be able to have the meeting had already been under discussion when we started getting emails around that request. So staff have made themselves available tonight in spite of the fact that this is a Friday evening. So we're very much appreciative of the fact that they are present to answer our questions. We wanted to discuss specifically the OCDSB return to school plans. That's particularly important given the minister's announcement yesterday. And so I would like to go directly to Director of Education, Camille Williams-Taylor, to
for everyone.
Good evening, trustees. In light of the fact that the chair's connection seems to be frozen, I thought perhaps she was saying to be turning it over to me at this point. So with your indulgence, I will proceed to keep the meeting going and to ensure that we privilege your time for discussion. We have, because we do know that the key impetus for this meeting is the discussion that trustees wish to have publicly around the return to school, reopening of school information that was posted by the district on Monday. We have prepared a very brief overview PowerPoint just to walk through publicly the journey that we've taken to this point. One of the things that in my opening comments I wanted to highlight is the recognition that there are many moving parts to this, and the fact that what was released on Monday was indeed a departure from what was discussed at the middle of July when we first presented a plan, and that would have been July 9th and 10th, and then subsequently July 22nd. And so one of the things that is a challenge with this process is that new information continues to arise, and with many different school boards and school configurations, questions of interpretation around some of those, some of the content of the guidelines have come into play, and we continue to receive new information, some of it clarifying, some of it changing our direction. Up until an hour ago, we received yet another memo about another detail pertaining to this process. Some of the new information changes the direction, and some of the new information confirms the direction. So what we presented today is simply an overview of what has informed the direction that we're undertaking now, and where it is that might go, what has changed over the past couple of days, because we have had a very significant piece of information from the ministry that has changed some of the thinking and some of the plans that came yesterday. So we will talk about that. And then the other piece of it is that we recognize that everyone would like to have up to the minute information the minute that it arrives. And that simply as quickly as we try to react with sharing information, then we do recognize that there are interpretations and understandings of impact that we have to kind of figure out. And so no one gets anything as fast as they would like it. We don't, you don't, and certainly our public doesn't, because we can recognize by the volume of questions that have been asked by staff, students, members of the public, parents, families, that there are lots of pieces of information that people would like to have. And in truth, some of it we simply don't have. Some of it we thought we had and has changed. And some of it we try to share out as quickly as we can. I think the last comment before I open the PowerPoint is the notion of reliability of information. There are times when we have received information where we have, because we are wondering about the relative, how it relates to OCDSB, the fact that the information seems to be missing context, that it renders it confusing. We don't necessarily push it out immediately because, again, where there is speculation, then that renders some of the information unreliable. And so as a result, some of the information that we have received, we've either looked at it and not communicated it, or we have rolled it into some of the planning and in a speculative way. One of the slides today will be demonstrative of exactly that, from a memo we received yesterday. And at the bottom, the fine print statement that is there that renders some of the decision making pertaining to that very memo a speculation. And we have it here in the PowerPoint to share with you. You have received that memo yourself, but given that it's the very last paragraph of the memo, you may not have seen it. So at this point, I'm going to ask Manager Guthrie to put the PowerPoint up on the screen. We do have AD Reynolds has joined us. AD Reynolds has been quite instrumental in his work in partnering the district with the Ottawa Public Health, along with the Ottawa Catholic District School Board, to ensure that there is an alignment. And up to this morning, myself and the director from the Catholic Board, as well as the two directors from the French boards, we met to continue the conversation around ensuring that we are serving Ottawa the best way that we can. So at this point, I'm going to turn it to AD Reynolds. I see that Vice Chair Penny is with us. And so Vice Chair, just so you recognize, Chair Scott has been, her internet is somewhat unstable at this point and has asked me to, oh, there you are.
I'm back.
You're back, okay. So AD Reynolds, if I could turn it to you, and through you, Chair Scott.
Great, thank you very much. So you can see before you the familiar graphic outlining the return to school plan and the complexity of it, all the different pieces and priorities that need to come together in order to make this work effectively. So we're targeting a start date, please advance. So we're targeting a start date for students for September 3rd with a bit of a progressive entry to allow students to become used to the routines that will be required for safety. The OCDSB is required to offer elementary in person, secondary adapted, we're one of the designated boards throughout the province, and remote for both elementary and secondary students whose parents or adult students opt to learn in that way. Please go ahead. So just some of the key dates and things that have happened in the last week or two. As you know, on July 30th, the minister releases the guide to reopening Ontario schools. That has been modified somewhat even since then. So there's a requirement to kind of keep going to look at it to see how the guidance in that document has evolved and continues to evolve. August 10th, the OCDSB did release our return to school plan for both elementary and secondary. On the 13th, very recently, the ministry released requirements for online learning in PPM 164, I think, which is going to require some changes in modeling and delivery for a number of districts across the province, likely ours included. August 16th, confirmation of attendance form is hopefully going to be returned by the majority of our, if not all of our parents and adult students, so that we can begin planning in earnest for who will be attending in person and who will be participating remotely. Please go ahead. So that ministry announcement yesterday had several pieces within it. Boards can access reserves to address class size, HVAC, and lease space to improve ventilation and to possibly also address class size, particularly at the elementary level. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The allocation-based funding for staffing and which is an amount across the province which can be applied for, and new guidelines for remote learning, which again I said contains some new and significant information for us that will impact how we approach things going forward. Please go ahead. And that brings us to August 14th. The ministry advises that the guide is a baseline and districts can make adaptations that support more physical distancing and other health and safety measures provided if they can. In-person classes for elementary school students 5 days a week. We know that that is one of the requirements that we are dealing in our return to school plan. Full instructional hours for all students, trying to get to the 300 minutes a day, whether it's remote or in person. Option for remote learning for all students for this upcoming school year. Focus on cohorting and limiting student contacts per the guidance memo. That does seem to be evolving somewhat. And adapted secondary school delivery for the designated boards, which, as we mentioned earlier, we are one of. Please go ahead. So in that PPM, for the first time, we saw some specific requirements in terms of the number of minutes for synchronous learning for students that are going to be in the fully remote learning model. You can see it's different between divisions, with the kindergarten students having a daily minimum synchronous learning time of 180 minutes, grades 1 to 3, 225, grades 4 to 8, also 225. And then grade 9 to 12 is a little bit more complicated. It's the higher of 60 minutes for each 75-minute class or 225 minutes per day for a full remote course load. So synchronous learning is identified basically as the teacher being actively involved and engaged with the students in some manner while the learning activity is occurring, whether it's providing direct instruction or being available to answer questions remotely, or somehow observing and participating and offering feedback in what is being done or worked on synchronously through the online learning in a nutshell. Please go ahead. So there are several implications. It seems that the best way to deliver this model, certainly at elementary, likely for secondary, is going to be by dedicating teachers and principals to deliver and oversee that remote learning program. It may lead or likely to lead to the creation of virtual schools. So schools set up entirely and staffed entirely in order to meet the requirements in the PPM. Remote students will no longer likely be connected to their community school or be in community school classes for learning activities. It does have an impact on the fluidity between models if we, as we would be required to, as the ministry has described it, staff this virtual school based on our current staffing complement, then it will require somewhat a reorging of our elementary and secondary schools as they are now, which will mean class space in those schools will become somewhat restricted and limited, meaning that if partway through a semester or a quadmester or a term, a student had wished to return to regular day school, that may not be possible and may only be possible at the end of a semester when we again could restaff and reorganize our schools. Student transitions will only likely be possible at the end of a semester in secondary or the end of a term in elementary. And as I mentioned, it will require reorganization of our schools for in-person learning, which will require considerable effort on the part of principals and a lot of potential disruption for staff. Please go ahead. So the funding for additional staffing, if CFO Carson or Superintendent McCoy want to make a comment on this, the provincial total of 30 million has been allocated to boards by the ministry rather than on an application process. And the OCDSB allocation will be at 1.3 million, which I think is further clarification we may have received over the course of the day. I don't know if there's any further comment on that or if it can just be addressed in questions later on. Not hearing anything, I'll just keep moving. Next slide, please. And likewise on ventilation, we are still awaiting some of the details of the allocation based on the most recent announcement, but we would expect between perhaps $1 and $2 million in order to support improvements in that area, which based on some of the comments that you heard during the budget discussion, doesn't go very far in this area. This funding is supplemental to annual expenditures averaging approximately 10 million annually on HVAC renewal and upgrades. Next slide, please. Lease space is another area that has more recently been discussed, and certainly at the provincial level. No additional funding for this. Schools, as you know, are purpose-built spaces for the most part. There have been some exceptions where we have had programs located in non-purpose-built spaces, but even then when we do use space outside of the school for educational purposes, they often require some considerable retrofit to meet the safety, occupational health and safety requirements that are needed to ensure that learning and working in those areas is up to standard. Additional planning for supervision, staffing, safety, and transportation are all going to be significant considerations if we are looking at any of those lease spaces. And timing certainly makes this a challenge. This is not something that could happen with a tight turnaround, unfortunately. Please go ahead. As the director had mentioned earlier, we are dealing with a shifting landscape, and it seems to be shifting quicker and perhaps even more significantly as time progresses. This was the comment at the bottom of the direction we received today, and it is certainly indicated that nothing that we could take from that direction, we couldn't take it to be carved in stone, so to say. There could still be changes, and to further add, we're also receiving feedback, colleague to colleague across the province, that a district that may have had a model that they thought was not only acceptable but applaudable yesterday is receiving direction or comment from the ministry today that model is no longer acceptable and that they need to make changes. This is the nature of the landscape in which we're operating right now, which is making it incredibly challenging to provide you, the board, and our community with the concrete, clear answers that you are hoping for. Please advance.
Just a sec before you do advance, I just want to interject there because I think it is worthy of pause that this is a memo that was pushed out this morning, and it came to the chairs and directors, and I believe I saw that Chair Scott had shared it with trustees. It is a public memo, it's not secret, but at the end of the memo, it does speak to some of the specifics of yesterday's announcement, and I really do need to highlight the note at the end here. Because it does, in fact, encapsulate in writing the last line. Therefore, the content of this memo should be considered to be subject to such regulations if and when made. And therefore, we will be building plans on the matter that came at the beginning of the memo that outlined all of the principles and the details of the announcements yesterday, with an understanding and a hope that the regulations will come to support. But I do want to reiterate, because of the nature of the questions that staff have been receiving, that this caveat was written at the bottom of the memo that you have received. Back to you, AD Reynolds.
Thank you. Please advance. So just before actually this slide, I will turn things back over to the director. But while I still have the mic, I do want to say, as a career-long teacher who never considered another occupation, as a parent, as a member of a community, I really do want to say we are doing our very best to develop the best educational system model that is as safe as possible for all of our students, including my own. It has been challenging, but with your support, I know that we can come up with something that will ensure quality education for our students and a safe workspace for our staff. So with that, over to you, Director.
Thank you, Associate Director. And so one of the things that, we know that trustees know this, but we know that this is a public meeting, and, I don't know that all of our public might be aware of this. We thought it wise to eliminate the nature of the competing requirements. That the document around the requirements, the guidelines that the ministry has released, again, that is a public document available on their website. As you read through it, you will recognize that there are a number of pieces where compliance is expected. And so, of course, the first being the Ministry of Education guidelines. I know that there are questions that circulate around, a PPM that arrived yesterday, a policy program memorandum, which people say, well, is that a rule and do we have to follow it? And the answer is yes, it is a directive, and this is why it is separate from the guideline document and has been issued as a memorandum, a program memorandum to school boards. And so when it is that we receive information in a variety of different ways. We get guidelines, we get memorandums, and then we get policy program memorandums, which inform our practice. People have wondered about the role of Ottawa Public Health. Ottawa Public Health does not approve plans. Ottawa Public Health has been working with us to provide their expert medical opinion based on the data, not only in Ottawa, but Eastern region, about what is wise, prudent, and safe. And they ask questions, they push back, and they do give critique questions around our proposals. They give input as to whether or not, based on their medical knowledge and the knowledge of the data, that the plans are prudent. And so they do not approve, but they do provide feedback. We also have a variety of different pieces to consider when we do think about our transportation. Transportation piece is a challenging piece. One of the questions that we do know that people have been asking is, why do we have to think about what other boards are doing? AD Reynolds has made reference to the fact that we are drawing on the experiences of our colleagues and jurisdictions like ours across the province, because again, so much information, so many interpretations, and we need to be moving quickly, that we do need to draw on the expertise, the feedback and the experiences of others. But we also have to consider alignment and service to Ottawa. And when we think about the transportation piece, our alignment with our coterminous board is an important consideration in coordination of what we're doing, because it does have impact not only on our financial pieces, but also on families and the experiences that families have. And so we do need to have that consideration. And so in that vein, we have maintained a very collaborative alliance with our coterminous board. You do see the symbols there for our unions and federations, because our plans cannot be articulated, developed, delivered, implemented without our education staff. Whether it be education services or educators who are in classrooms, they are the people who will be delivering and implementing. And so we need to be cognizant and respectful of the collective agreements that guide the practice, but also their input. And trustees have heard over time that our federation partners have been at the table with us ever since the closure of school to provide feedback and thoughts as we continue along this way. So if you look at all of these pieces and they started to move, which if I were very technically savvy, I would make them move, but they are moving together. And we need to consider each one of them every time we consider a model. Could you advance, please? So the other piece, of course, when we think about multiple moving parts, nothing done quickly ever aligns perfectly. And so as we go through all of the guidance documents, the memos, the directives, the coordination of multiple people, we have to prioritize where is it that we're going to say, okay, we have enough of this, might not be 100%. We need to move to this other priority. And so we know that safety is the #1 priority. And how do we know that we are as safe as we can be? How do we know that we are as safe as is prudent to bring students and staff in? And that's where our work with public health comes in, where it is they look at what we're suggesting and say, well, that's not safe enough. Here are some of the things that you need to consider. Back to the drawing board, how do we improve? We also need to consider what's pedagogically sound. Some of the ideas that people may have sound great on paper, but when you work with children, when you work with students, when you work with adolescents, you recognize that this may not be the ideal way to get students engaged. And then we have to think about the operational pieces. We have the symbol of the school bus there, but it's not just the transportation. We talk about, and I know one of the trustees raised a few meetings ago, we expect students to wear masks. How are we going to ensure that they do that? How are we going to operationalize it? How are we going to get it to them? How are we going to ensure that we are working with students who have difficulty with that? So that school bus represents not just the transportation pieces, but all of the operational pieces that are required to implement a day. And this is where I need to highlight, and AD Reynolds made reference to people working hard. I think that I need to acknowledge that we had 10 principals in the boardroom last week. They were properly physically distanced, they were masked, and so all hygiene considerations were taken into place to bring these folks in person. But they were in person for 4 full days last week, actually mapping out what happens when a student arrives at school, walking through the school day. What does a building need to look like? 3 of the senior team actually walked through a school to look at different things that we hadn't considered. And when you walk it through operationally, is when you recognize that there are great things on paper that don't work in practice, and the fact that the footprints of our schools are different. And so we need to leave some elasticity for that. We need our communities to know, we need our trustees to know that sometimes this will require making adjustments, making changes to our plans on the fly, because we need to, in order to move to the next plan, we need to close the loop on that plan. And so while it is that trustees have talked about broad consultation and community meetings and community input and so forth, we have 2 weeks to the beginning of school. And so we are very fretful, to be frank, about the fact that we need to move along very quickly, and we need to make decisions very quickly as we learn, and we need to change. That said, the announcement yesterday by the minister, who indicated that when asked about the models that 16 of 24 adapted school boards have undertaken, which is a model that was similar to the one that OCSB and OCDSB presented on Monday for our secondary schools, the minister made the public comment that the expectation of the ministry is 50% presence at school. This sends a number of us back to the drawing board, if you will. And so that will reflect a change because we will need to reflect on that direction. Many of us spent a significant amount of time today getting clarification, understanding what that means, understanding what needs to be done next in order to get us to that compliance, because that compliance has been prioritized. And that is not to say prioritized at the expense of safety, but it is prioritized with us considering all safety measures that we need to put into place to ensure that that is implemented in a safe manner. So that is to, again, illustrate the continuity of change as it occurs, and the fact that each time that happens, we need to operationalize steps in a prudent and quick manner. So I believe that there is one more slide, Manager Guthrie, if you would. So what this is to say is that while it is that in a normal year, the things that would be happening in families would be getting school supplies ready and visiting the school if it's going to be new and all those kinds of things. This is not a normal year, and we are not in a position to say that we have an ironclad plan out at this point. It is good to know that we have been granted a green light, which had been our initial plan anyway, around a progressive entry. And that has been communicated in writing to us, to all districts today. That was a part of the OCDSB plan in the first place, a progressive entry. And it's all the more important now that we have a variety of things that we are still yet to determine, only 2 weeks out. The last box on your screen there that says reorganization of in-school, in-person schools is going to be significant, because what that means is that teaching assignments, class lists, all of those pieces will need to be reconstructed. And folks have asked about we don't want to say the survey, the confirmation of registration, and why it is that, you know, we can't prolong that anymore. And it is simply because we need to put those class lists together and organize and staff. Because one of the other things in the box above, you will see the virtual schools has to be established. It was not a direction that we wanted to take, as we were wanting to keep our students connected to their classrooms and their schools. The model that has been released for remote learning in the PPM that came yesterday would preclude that. And so that will mean that a variety of different measures will have to be taken to set up and operationalize a different approach. So not only will there be an impact for our secondary planning, but also our elementary planning. That said, it's important for our communities as well as our trustees to be aware that we're not the only district in that scenario. It's not a huge comfort to know that, because the work is large and it's still there for all of us. But we continue to communicate with each other to try to facilitate a faster movement, because we know that our communities need this information. So as AD Reynolds indicated, we do want to communicate to our public, to our communities, to our students and families, as well as to our trustees, that we are pulling out pretty well all stops that we have from the point of view of time, effort, imagination, and commitment to moving this information into a deliverable. We have not hidden information. Information is available to us. We're sharing it. In the event we did have an oversight on Monday, where we did not provide the design of the release of the structure of the secondary school model, along with the release of the reopening plan. That was certainly unintentional, and it was an oversight, which we believe we rectified on Tuesday with a very fulsome explanation, a memo, as well as updating the website. Unfortunately, it's possible that by Monday that might be moot, because we may likely be looking at yet another approach to how it is that we will be engaging our secondary school students. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair, given that this is a time for trustee conversation questions regarding the information you have received prior, as well as the information being shared here today. So Chair Scott.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. I have a number of hands on raised already, so I do have a speakers list of half a dozen trustees, beginning with Trustee Fisher.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And can you remind me if we've adopted rules of committee so we have a bit of extra time?
And do we have a seconder for that? Don't take your hands down, just somebody speak up, please.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. I'll call the question then on adopting rules of committee. All those in favor
In favor?
and opposed? And that motion is carried. So Trustee Fisher, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Madam Chair. And I will not have a large preamble. I will say I do want to thank staff. I know I've been quite aggressive this week on the change of plans as it relates to the secondary school schedule. You know, I think that's mostly a communications issue. I think it's just reflecting a broad frustration from a lot of parents about not knowing, the pace of change that was coming about. And so I certainly don't want staff to feel that was, directed at them. And with all the other changes, I think this is mostly directed at the province. So I have a number of questions. I'll go one by one because I know I don't have a lot of time. My first question is in your conversations with Ottawa Public Health, what advice, what standards have they asked us to follow? Are we following them? If not, which ones have we sought modifications to? And why?
Madam Director or AD Reynolds?
Well, I was nodding to AD Reynolds as I thought Mahili might be looking at me, but go ahead,
Sorry.
AD Reynolds, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. And you may have some specific follow-up questions, Trustee Fisher, just because there's a number of standards in a number of different areas between student health and well-being, occupational health and safety, all of that. So Ottawa Public Health is very cooperative and they want to be supportive. They understand the complexities with which we are dealing. They will often, turn to us to say, here's what we are concerned with most at this time. How do you think you can make that work? Because we don't want to tell you how to go about doing it. I don't think that we are not complying with any of the requirements or requests that they've made. We take their input very seriously. After all, maintaining the safety and well-being of our staff and students, it just has to be our top priority. So we have not done anything to the best of my knowledge, that would at all, from an Ottawa Public Health perspective, indicate, discomfort from them on steps that we're taking. That being said, they're subject to other oversight as well, right, from the Ministry of Health and the Chief Medical Officer of Health, and they have to operate within the same parameters. So they understand that they have their parameters from provincial authority. We have ours, and they want to work with us to best make whatever we're doing in terms of a model fit within there. So we're, I guess that may be a longer answer than you were hoping for, but it's the long and short of it is we speak with them almost every day to try to make sure what we're doing is aligning with what they consider to be the top priorities for safety.
So before I move to the next question, can you give us a sense of maybe some of the modifications that needed to be made, just
Sure.
given the differences between health and the education sector?
And it goes back and forth based on changing information we receive from different authorities. For example, it wasn't that long ago we had a model where we had 2 cohorts in a day and they were in for a longer day. But that resulted in a transition between the 2 classes in the day where conceivably, even if half the students are in the building, a typical high school, that's still 500 kids. And you have 500 kids and 50 staff, 60 staff moving through the halls. Even if you try to control it, they're going to be moving through the halls all at once. Ottawa Public Health did not tell us not to do that, but they certainly raised that as an area where we'd have to be very careful in moving forward. Likewise, we received feedback from the ministry that probably wasn't very safe, that kind of transition in the middle of the day. So we moved to what we presented this week, which was just the 1 class in, because that maximized safety. But again, the priorities seem to be shifting somewhat.
Okay, second question I have is, how much will the change in busing plans presented by the province this week cost the OCDSB? Have we costed that out between OSTA and the service providers yet?
So I will start that, and I believe CFO Carson is on our call. No, in short, that is something that is in progress right now. OSTA is continuing to try to work between the two school boards, but there are a variety of different pieces that they are considering. And I don't see CFO Carson, but I do believe he's here. I don't know if CFO Carson would care to comment. There he is.
Just very briefly, Madam Chair, the OSTA has worked on this as well, because this revised requirement would in fact pretty much end up with full day schedules. And in some ways it would actually save us some dollars, because it would put us back somewhat to the usual linkages between secondary and elementary. But Ms. Kiriako and Mr. Hellman are working on that now.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. The next question is, you talked about obviously the changing landscape around the online learning and the secondary schedule commitments. Do you have a sense whether or not we'll have sufficient information by Sunday for parents to review and to make a decision around?
Through you, Madam Chair, one of the things we did, which was an unusual move on our part, was to push out the actual PPM to the community. So that went yesterday in a community communication. It's very unusual for us to do that, but what we didn't want to do was waylay that information, because what we would translate and create into a nice communications chart was probably going to be the same content anyway. So that's the information we have. It is about the guidance around the nature of what the engagement is going to look like and how much time there's going to be. We frankly will not have, once we can read it around and, you know, pretty it up and do all kinds of things to it. But that's the salient information, and we're not going to have new information by the end of the day on Sunday that will really make any substantive difference. What is going to be relevant to parents is how it is that that information, that architecture comes alive in their school with their students. And so when we think about the course configurations, the class configurations, how many students, how are we allocating, that's when we're going to have a more substantial representation of what it actually is going to look like from the point of view of what materials will be used and so on and so forth. That will not be available until we have the full architecture of what that virtual learning will look like. So what is there is actually quite substantial from the point of view of what it is that parents can expect. And I think that those people who had a look at it already will see that it reflects a significant departure from what we saw back in the spring. So it is far more predictable. It is far higher expectations. The nature of the content, the nature of the delivery, and the understanding of the role of the educator has been outlined in a far more detailed manner for our communities to see.
And secondary?
It is both. So it's the secondary and the elementary. Are you referring to the
I'm referring to
structure?
the structure of the secondary.
Structure. We that is our weekend project. Our goal is to come to, because the time is ticking. So even though, you know, on one hand, you know, our trustees who represent the community are trying to reflect the whole idea that parents need more information, and we agree. But on the other side of it, we need information to ensure that we are going to be able to build this out in a timely way. So definitely, we are trying to ensure we push this forward as quickly as we can, and our goal is Monday.
When you're rethinking the secondary schedules, what are some of the biggest challenges that we're facing from a collective agreement standpoint?
It's a great question. I'm going to ask ED Reynolds, you're here, but I do think that our Superintendent McCoy is here as well. So Superintendent McCoy.
Thank you, Director. Yes, I'm here. Some of the considerations as we've move through our planning and which continue to impact our, for example, ensuring that all of our teachers receive the amount of prep time that they are entitled to under their collective agreements. As well, there are provisions related to the lunch period and the amount of assigned time versus unassigned time. So those pieces are in both our elementary and secondary collective agreements. As well, as trustees know, we generally spend weeks to months in terms of the staffing process in the spring, looking towards the fall. And so if there are changes, we've been talking to our federations about the fact that there will be some need for flexibility again, even before yesterday's announcement in terms of what might happen given the numbers that we have opting for remote learning. And so we've been talking about how we move forward in terms of making some of the changes around the remote learning and the impact that that might have on staffing assignments. As well, there are provisions related to access to leaves, and we've had more than the usual, as you can imagine, requests for leaves and accommodations, and so again are working through those. I think those are the key pieces in terms of our collective agreements.
Okay, thank you. Staying on secondary, have we considered a staggered time or staggered entry for secondary?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'm going to turn to AD Reynolds.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when you say staggered entry, do you mean at the start of the year or staggered entry on a daily basis?
Staggered entry at the beginning of the year, like elementary.
Yeah, we are. We really, in speaking with principals and other educators, we want to try to prioritize right at the beginning some time for the grade 9s entering a 9 to 12 program, so they have a bit of an opportunity to adjust to their new school, the new surroundings, the new reality. It's a big transition anyway, and we know there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we invest a little bit more time in that. They have a much better experience. So we may see, just because we're cohorting, the first 2 days of that first week, at least that's our planning, turned over to really letting each grade 9 cohort come in and adjust before the returning of more senior students come into the school.
Okay,
and if I may, Trustee Fisher, just to add to that, it's important that people understand why it is that this progressive entry is important. I say progressive because we're building. So as groups come in, other groups are added. But there's an opportunity as well for our teachers to practice, right? So we're looking at completely different protocols to ensure safety. They only work if people use them properly. And so we want to ensure that people have time to be able to practice those and develop a different habits of mind around how school is going to look, to bring that stress down around the change. And then we are able to move into the business of learning. So we want to be clear that it is in the interest of our children, our students, our secondary school students, as well as our staff, for confidence and to bring that stress level down.
I appreciate that. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Okay. The next question I have relates to the HVAC ventilation. Have we started to assess how many schools might need to have retrofits? And if so, what criteria are we using, and how will we prioritize?
CAO Carson.
Madam Chair, that work began in April, and so far we've been identifying those areas where the systems needed to be not upgraded so much as to make sure maintenance was on track. We have also been working through to make sure that where operable windows had been taken out of service for safety reasons, we're looking at making sure we can re-implement those. I think we have identified that we will continue looking at this on an ongoing basis. The combination of fresh air, increasing the air exchanges will be sufficient at this time. I think it's important to mention we have been, over the last 10 years, we've probably spent between $80 and $100 million in HVAC upgrades. Where there are individual situations, we'll be working with some of the information the ministry has committed to providing next week. If there were to be additional air purification required, for example, there are mobile units that can be obtained, and our staff are looking into that now.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the last question I have is, if we need to fall back into a learn at home scenario, can staff explain broadly or hopefully in detail how we anticipate to make that adjustment as part of our planning? Let's say in October, November, the second wave comes. How do you envision that happening?
I'll turn that to AD Reynolds, as they've been a part of that operationalizing.
Sure, thank you. It's certainly front of mind. We are focusing most of our energies right now on trying to come up with what the adaptive model in person. Where we had landed most recently, where every one of our teachers was doing some daily synchronous learning with a cohort that was at home, was part of the strategy to build the capacity for those teachers to do a more robust synchronous educational experience with the students who are at home, so that in the event if we had to transition to remote learning, their skill set would be improved over what they did their very best to do in the spring under the rapidly changing circumstances. If we shift to away from that, we'll have to invest some more work in training and preparedness. The models themselves are set up to move to remote from in person, regardless of what we do. But I think one of the biggest pieces of that will be building teacher capacity, regardless of how we specific model in which we return. Teachers will be posting work for the cohort that is at home to do, and we will have some teachers providing remote support, I'm sure, for that cohort while at home. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity for some real-time practice, doing more hours, more minutes of remote learning per course as we kick off the school year. But I know Superintendent Lehman and his group, as well as Superintendent Tuage, are thinking about how their staff, their resources can provide more training to teachers for that eventuality.
I'm going to ask Superintendent Tuage as well. She has some additional commentary. Trustee Fisher.
Through you, Madam Chair. So as shared by Associate Director Reynolds, one of the key pieces we're putting in place for the fall is every teacher in elementary and secondary will be maintaining either a Google Classroom or a VLE that they will populate weekly. And that is because in the event that we get information from Ottawa Public Health that an individual class or cohort needs to go into a remote environment, for example, for 2 weeks, we are able to turn over overnight and have the learning continue. In terms of Trustee Fisher's additional question as to what would it look like, the PPM is very clear that if we move into a remote system, that these requirements and the minutes would come into play. And so we would be required from kindergarten right through grade 12 to provide daily schedules and timetables with the outline time for synchronous learning in the minutes that are required, which includes large group, small group, as well as one-to-one or small group intervention. In addition to time for asynchronous and synchronous time throughout the day, that would result in 300 minutes of instruction, with, of course, the possibility for parents, if required, to apply for an exemption around the synchronous requirements in any remote environment. But even for an individual child, if we have an individual student who will be required to go into a remote environment, there is a requirement in the PPM that if the child is away for 3 days or more, we are required to provide synchronous learning at that point, even if it's an individual child, to ensure the continuity of learning.
Great. And very last question. What scenarios have we run from a human resources standpoint in terms of the availability of staff, both custodians, educators, front office staff, ECEs? What scenarios have we run in terms of the availability of staff and potentially running into gaps throughout the year based on the pandemic and the lack of, let's say, a lack of availability of OTs? And what's the plan if we run into a talent crunch?
Superintendent McCoy.
So through you, Madam Chair, our focus in human resources has been, in addition to the regular staffing process in terms of ensuring that our regular complement of staff in all categories is filled going into the school year, is also looking at our casual pools in terms of OTs and others. And it's been an ongoing recruitment effort. We are cognizant that this year coming up, there is likely to be a higher level of absenteeism, and so we know the importance. So to the extent that we can, we are ensuring, but we are also starting to think about what some other options might be. For example, thinking about, as we have in previous urgent circumstances, what staffs might be available, for example, centrally to redeploy, and can we be nimble in terms of doing that quickly in the event that, for example, a school finds itself short of several teachers or other staff, which could impact its ability to continue operating for a particular period of time.
Yeah, that's great, and I appreciate all the answers to the questions tonight. And again, want to thank staff for all the work that you're doing. I know that you're responding to incredible deadlines and changing information, and much of this uncertainty, rests at the feet of the province, not the school board. And I just want to thank everybody for all the time that they're putting into this incredible effort. And I am confident that we can get there. It's probably going to take a bit longer than we would like, but I really do appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Trustee Fisher. Next, I have Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to echo Trustee Fisher's comments to staff. Certainly, I've been speaking to media this week as well, and really trying to reinforce the message that I certainly don't put any blame on the staff of the OCDSB. I know staff have been working around the clock, as have we trustees, trying to ensure a safe start back to school. This is an extraordinarily stressful time for families, for staff in our board, for teachers who are parents as well. And I think my first question really to staff, and I mean, I've been speaking out publicly about this, but I would like an honest answer. I want to know, are we ready for September 3rd? And regardless of a staggered entry, with now the shifting landscape and the unlikely or the strong memo suggesting that protocols and proposals are still draft, how in the world can the province assume that we can shift an entire system overnight and be ready for a safe start in September? Would we be better off requesting that the province delay the restart of school? And I would like a staff comment about that, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So recognizing that we do operate at the behest of the Ministry of Education and under the direction of the Ministry of Education, we certainly will be ready to receive students safely to our buildings. Whether or not we will be able to transport those students on the 3rd of September, we don't know. I can't guarantee that we will be ready to do that at that time. There may be other operational opportunities and certainly pedagogical opportunities that will be delayed because the readiness for those pieces will not be the first priority. The first priority will be safe structures, safe entry, safe practices. And to do that, given that all the things are different, we need to first make sure that the architecture is ready. And we believe that we will have the architecture in terms of the design, but the operational components to get us there will be delays. And we will ask for the indulgence of our community and the indulgence of our trustees to bear with us as we navigate those delays. And because we certainly know that it's not just a question of bringing students in safely, but it's also a question of helping people to learn entirely new routines. And we know that if anybody has ever had a child come into kindergarten, you will know the miracle of the difference between the child coming in, the 4-year-old that starts in September, and what that 4-year-old is able to do in November. And that is all because of practice. That is all because of continued direction, important detailed design, resource availability. And so one of the things is that, again, because we are doing this quickly and we're doing this in a changing environment, we will get there, but we will not have everything in a completely different turned around perfect scenario by the 3rd. And so one of the things my staff, my team has heard me say repeatedly, I have said it in multiple places, is we are not striving for perfection. We are striving for the best that we can do, and we are putting the best at the priority of safety first. And so once it is that we are confident that the architecture and operations are safe, we will work on coming to perfection on the other areas of pedagogy, instruction, and all of those other pieces that come in behind.
I appreciate that, Director. And I do want to just reiterate that I do firmly believe as a parent that the board really is working for a safe restart. And I am sending my daughter back to school on September 3rd. I'm nervous. And I'm nervous because there's a lot of uncertainty. One of the things that I'm wondering about is how custodial staff and OTs and occasional teachers are going to work. My understanding is that they're likely to rotate between schools. And so I want to understand, how is that any different from what we saw with long-term care facilities this spring, where we had staff rotating between and bringing a virus into the facilities?
So I'll begin to answer the question, and then I'll turn the my mic over, if you will, to CFO Carson. We have to be careful about comparing two different contexts. So that's one of the things that is important to identify, that the nature of the work, the contact, the engagement between staff and students in a school is not the mirror image of the kind of engagement in the facilities that you've referenced. And same thing when we think about our healthcare scenarios and so forth. So we do have to be careful about recognizing roles, responsibilities, and contexts. But that said, the question is a valid question from the point of view of moving individuals. So what I will ask CFO Carson, if he would take over with the further details around that, as it does pertain to our custodial team in particular.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We started going through this in April with Ottawa Public Health during the most stringent part of the lockdown. For example, maintenance staff were not allowed in the building. And then again, in consultation with Ottawa Public Health on an ongoing basis, that was expanded. They could attend one building at a time, then per day. Then it was expanded so that they could visit multiple schools. As the director has said, our staff that are moving between buildings are not in close contact with children. And so from a maintenance point of view, we're comfortable that we can continue that. If Ottawa Public Health feels that the rate of community spread or there's a problem in a particular school, obviously we'll modify that. With respect to our casual staff, I think it's important to note that most of our casual staff are working in the evenings when we don't have students present. We have identified individual sections for staff to work on, so they will be physically distanced. They'll also be wearing all of the PPE that's been prescribed from the province. So I think the two biggest differences are, as the director mentioned, the nature of the work, the very different nature of the work between a custodian and a PSW, and the prevalence of the infection as it was in long-term care earlier this spring. We will be working with the provincial authorities. We have an obligation to report daily to the province on any incidents or suspicions of COVID. We'll be working with public health, and we will need to change those processes should the situation evolve.
Given, if I may, Trustee Schwartz, I do know that part of your question was about occasional teachers as well. So if I might ask Superintendent McCoy to comment on the plans there.
Certainly, and through you, Madam Chair. Again, I think it's thinking about all of the different layers of precautions that are in place. So part of the funding that we've received is to ensure that we are able to provide all of our casual and occasional teachers with the same full day of training that we are providing to our regular staff around health and safety. And part of that will include familiarizing them with the different protocols that are in place. So for example, we will be relying on the self-assessment that we will be asking all of our staff to do, which by now I think we're all familiar with, which asks them to go through the screening process, and we'll be encouraging them to, to not come to work or not to enter the building in the event that they have any symptoms or meet any of the other criteria. In addition, like our other staff, we will be providing them with the appropriate PPE, which is intended to protect them, but also to protect others. So that will include the disposable medical grade masks, as well as a face shield, which can be worn depending on the nature of the contact that they're having. The physical distancing, as well as hand hygiene and other protocols that are in place. So again, ensuring that they are familiar with all of the precautions that we have to protect not only our students, but also our staff. We're currently still in discussions with our federations with regard to how we will be moving forward in terms of access to work. But I would also just like to indicate that in our elementary schools, we have had for several years and intend to continue to have a designated occasional teacher program, which means that we are putting an occasional teacher in every one of our elementary schools who will work in that school. In previous years, those OTs could be redeployed to other sites. Our plan is initially to have the person remain in the school again, so that they are part of the school and can step in terms of absences there, and looking at the potential expansion of that. So for example, in some of our larger sites, increasing the number of dots that we have, and looking at whether a similar model or some kind of hybrid of that could work in our secondary schools as well. So those are the kinds of things that we're continuing to discuss with our federations and look at from an HR perspective.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, how much time have I got on the clock?
You have 1 minute and 8 seconds.
So then continuing my questions, I have a few more, but one of the things, so you mentioned with virtual learning or the remote learning, and I find this fascinating that now we're talking about virtual schools. And so kids aren't going to be with their own cohorts, and they're not necessarily going to be with teachers that they know. During a pandemic, when kids need certainty and safety is also about the people around them. So this really does concern me deeply, that we're not necessarily going to be talking about community schools in this context. So what actually happens when a child might present sick and need to go into a remote learning circumstance, or a parent is sick at home and they need to go remote learn? Are they removed from their class immediately? And then they're in with a whole different cohort of people?
So that's a very good question, Trustee Schwartz, because we certainly know that we have enough information right now to contemplate the design of a virtual school structure. And we also know that we have enough information at this point to contemplate the design of our students who are in cohort A and cohort B, if you will, who are going to be at school for part of the time and who are going to be at home for part of the time in our secondary schools. So we have a sense of the information about what that design will look like. It's the the interlocking pieces, if you will, that are the moving parts that are difficult to imagine every single scenario, because the scenarios will differ. We will have scenarios where someone in a family might be ill, and so the student then has to be isolated for a period of time. So they are well, but they must be isolated. And so what we do know is that there is a capacity for those students to continue to remote learn as if they were as in our secondary school model, where we have students who are not coming every day, but are still having some learning opportunities. So Superintendent Tuwage referenced the Google Classrooms and some of those structures where there will be the opportunity for students to access the learning in a continuous way, because that hasn't been anticipated. But we do have other scenarios where a child might be ill. And so that will present itself with a different question. And I can't tell you that we have all of those operational details completely outlined at this point, because again, this is a completely different scenario than any scenario that we've dealt with before. And to add to your question, and I suspect it's on your question list or on somebody else's question list, that the same scenario can present itself around will present itself around our staff. And so what are the mechanisms that we will have in place? Today we did receive a guidance memorandum at about 6:30 this afternoon around that piece, and a mechanism that we as staff need to construct to be a part of that process as well. So as we think about new scenarios and we start to imagine possibilities, new operational structures are emerging, but I cannot tell you that we have thought of every possibility. What we are going with right now, we are looking at the priority of the majority of students in school in those structures. We're looking at the priority of our students who have complex needs, who need to be served properly. We are looking at the complexities of our students in vulnerable communities who need to be served properly. And then once we feel confident in that service and being ready for the third, we start to layer in the exceptions and the what ifs and so forth. And that's where patience and indulgence will be required for us to continue to build those forward. Please know that as we build those structures forward, not only are we guided by the requirements for reporting through public health as well as the Ministry of Education, but we are also guided by the requirements for privacy. And so respecting those legal components. But the soft side of it is the mental health and the dignity of all of our individuals, whether they be our students or our staff and their families, as well as the community. And so that's a piece here that our communities are experiencing this pandemic and this crisis in different ways. And so we need to be cognizant of that daily. And as we think about our plans, we cannot be bureaucratic. We have to have a bureaucratic operation system underneath, but the operationalizing of these bureaucracies have to be extremely compassionate and considerate of folks' dignity and their own discomfort in this scenario. So I've said a mouthful there because there are many pieces to this, and I hope that you could see the iterations of consideration of that question that you asked, Trustee Schwartz.
So I do have another question about at the secondary level in particular, how transportation is going to work between. So I'll give a scenario where students finish at 11:30 at Colonel By, but they live out in Canada because they're part of the IB program. How are we going to manage to get those kids back in a 50-minute window?
Through you, Madam Chair, that question has come up more than once as we've started to consider. I see both CFO Carson and AD Reynolds have raised, have opened their windows here. But I would dare say that while it is that is a consideration for the current model, we might actually have a different consideration based on the information we received today and yesterday. And so I'm not sure that we can have a complete answer to that question. And I'm not confident that the answer to the question won't be moot by Monday morning. So I'll allow AD Reynolds.
And I do appreciate that. Sorry to interrupt you, Director. I do appreciate that. I do know that there is information that the principals are sending home for special schools like Canterbury, Colonel By and others. So I just on the public record, I think it's important that we at least address that. My other question was actually about octomestering at Colonel By in particular. where there's going to be a real huge gap between when they start a course and then they start retaking the course again many months later. And I'm not sure how kids are going to remember, 5 months between a math course, the content that they learned 5 months before. So if I could have a comment a little bit from a pedagogical perspective on that. Thanks.
So I will turn this question to AD Reynolds. AD Reynolds.
Sure, and I'll take a stab at both. Under the current model, immediately following the lunch period is a remote online support period. It's optional. We anticipated likely the students in the cohorts who are at home would avail themselves of that most likely, given that the students who would be on transportation home had just been in school for the morning. So that in fact gives them the hour plus 75 minutes before their synchronous class would start. Again, that's in the model as it is now, and that could shift. In terms of octomestering, obviously it's not perfect. We worked closely with the principals of the two IB schools. It's kind of the best thing that we thought we could come up with, given the need for concurrency of learning in the IB program. At least it's not, in some ways it is better. Well, they'll do half of their course at one point during what would typically be the first semester and the other half later on. They do at least get an opportunity of about 20-21 days to be back with those teachers in a fairly intense manner and review what they may have forgotten. I think there'll be opportunities to provide some remote work for those students to stay brushed up as they move through the year. But I'm not going to indicate that is our preferred model. None of these models are our preferred model over returning to conventional learning. But it is the best that we think we could do with what we have to work.
Okay, I appreciate that. I
We're
think
out
I'm
of
out of
time,
time.
Trustee
Yeah,
Schwartz.
I just want to thank staff again for pulling all this together and really for stepping up at a very, very difficult time. So I'll if you could put me back on the list, Trustee Scott, that would be great. I have additional questions.
I can put you back on the list. However, I will say that we seem to be averaging at least 10 minutes per speaker, and I have 10 people still on my list for the first time, which is 100 minutes.
Understood. Thank you.
So I will ask people please to try to be reasonably succinct, and I will ask staff also please to try to be reasonably succinct. On next to Trustee Bell.
Great, thank you. I also want to extend my gratitude to everyone that is on this panel and everyone who's listening, because I know you've responded to hundreds, if not thousands, of emails from concerned parents and teachers over the past couple of days, as have I. So in my response to parents and teachers, I have said that I will do absolutely everything I can to ensure that your child is safe and feels safe, that our plan is based on evidence and the advice of public health. So we all know I'm not an epidemiologist, but what public health is directing the community writ large to do for this pandemic doesn't jive with what we are proposing for elementary students. Parents are scared, teachers are scared, custodians are scared. I know some of my colleagues are scared. I'm petrified of sending my daughter into a classroom with 30 children because I don't feel that she and her educators will be safe. So we have an obligation as leaders around this table to listen to those fears, to communicate and to build trust. And if we can't make it safe, and if we can't make people feel safe, we are not ready to open. So my questions are, and I will go through them very quickly. How are we going to communicate and build trust between now and the opening of school? When and how will we share with parents of Lisgar and Nepean what is the state of their ventilation systems in their schools? When and how will we share the number of children that will be in my daughter's or anyone else's kindergarten class with those parents? When and how will we communicate how many hours a day students will be outside? When and how will we see what we are spending on our budget for the COVID response? And the last question is, when and how will we communicate with Jim Watson to tell him we are ready to take him up on his offer for space?
Madam Director.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. So I've tried to capture all the questions that you've asked, and I'm going to take a go at some of them. And I have Superintendent Tuage and CFO Carson on cue to pick up on some of those pieces. And so you've asked some specifics about how and when. In terms of the budget item, you asked about the cost of budget, and that was a question that you asked yesterday in our budget meeting. And so we have committed to providing that update for our next committee of the whole budget meeting, which I believe is next week, Tuesday. You asked about the HVAC for Nepean and Lisgar. And so I'm going to turn that to CFO Carson to take a go at responding to that question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We did receive that request the other day from the trustee, and I know someone's preparing a written response. The high schools have been looked at, and the systems are operating to code. Until the building is occupied, we'll have to see where the challenges might arise in individual classrooms, and we will look at it and monitor as we go. But I know when we saw the written question from the trustee the other day, Mr. Bradley was putting together a written response, so we'll get that out probably on Monday.
Thank you. Thank you, CFO Carson. And the other question you asked was in regards to how many students in the classroom and so forth. One of the things is with this shift to having a virtual classrooms, if you will, we are likely to be working within our usual parameters for around our staffing, but we did talk about some of our class size averages already. And so that is, we look at our primary caps and our junior caps, but I think that the key question that you were asking is about the access to additional facilities outside, so that we are able to spread out our students more. And I do believe at the beginning of our presentation, we talked about the fact that while that looks great on paper, that is challenging in a variety of different ways, because a building is not a building is not a building is not a building. So just because a building is a space doesn't mean that it is a space that meets the conditions that we are able to safely situate students. And moving students, and I think I made reference to this in a previously asked question in another context, moving students into a building that is not a building that they know, into and trying to retrofit it into a classroom-like space is a very time-consuming prospect. Transporting those students, creating new transportation routes to get those students there is a different kind of prospect. And so there are a variety of challenges that while it is it looks like a great paper solution, it does become a challenge to do that in a timely way. And I think that it has been duly noted that time is not our friend in this particular scenario. That said, however, there are measures that have been put in place to maximize the spaces that we do have and that we do have access to, and that will be ready on the 3rd of September. And so one of those things we've already started working on is assuring that we maximize every square foot. And so emptying classrooms of the usual homey features like bookshelves and sofas and such, to ensure that we're able to spread our students out. Looking at, we have started to engage in the obtaining barriers that will allow for greater safety for students. And I think Superintendent Tuage can speak to that with some with some fluency. And when I pass it to Superintendent Wage, she will also speak to the whole role of the outdoor classroom and the opportunity for students to maximize that time, because the outdoor space is a space that we do have purview over and that we do feel confident is safe for our students. So Superintendent Wage, if I've asked you to comment on that, please.
Through you, Madam Chair. And so I'm going to try to very efficiently answer Trustee Bell's questions, but I first want to address a comment that she did make yesterday, where the question was, will we be putting kindergarten children in desks? So really important, if we think about the developmental age of children, we are not a district that will be bringing in individual desks for children. It would be not appropriate developmentally for the children, for the learning tasks, and for inquiry. What we have done is we have ordered for all of our kindergarten classes on the round tables, 6 groupings of dividers. And so they are clear in the middle, so the children will be able to see each other. But when they're either eating or they're engaged in an inquiry, they will actually have an additional barrier between the children. In terms of one of the greatest gifts about kindergarten, we have the benefit of both kindergarten educators and ECEs. So we have an English teacher, a French teacher, and our early childhood educators. In our district-run programs, we have an overlap between ECEs for a duration of the day, even more educators. When we talk about maximizing space, we are protecting the gymnasium of all of our schools for our kindergarten educators. So outdoor space, gymnasium space, classroom space. And so when we think about pedagogy, or we thinking about the kinds of activities that we will do, we will be working to pod our kindergarten students into smaller groups within our classroom. We all have to understand these are our youngest learners. We're talking about 3.5-year-olds in some cases. They will not understand the concept of 1 meter. And we will be focusing on working with them to pod them in smaller groups, lots of really good hand hygiene, and focusing on activities that minimize contact across groups and across different classes.
Trustee Bell?
Thank you. So that type of information definitely helps to build trust. So thank you so much, Trustee Twice. And I would, through you, Chair, the overarching question, though, I think the most important one for me right now is what is our strategy? How are we going to communicate and build that trust between now and September 3rd?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I see that Executive Officer Giroux has turned her camera on, so that's a signal that she's lots to say. I will say that thanks to Executive Officer Giroux and her team, that work has already begun. So I will say that starting with, we knew that pictures are worth 1,000 words, and working with a company to help us, we were able to very quickly produce the video to help families have an idea of what it looks like to be in a new kind of classroom coming into the fall, and the capacity to produce that in Arabic as well is, we believe, a helpful move to communicating not only confidence but care to some of our newer families to us. That said, I know that Executive Officer Giroux has a fulsome architecture from behind as well as forward around how it is that we will continue to do this, because it has been iterative and cyclical and changing as appropriate. So Executive Officer Giroux.
Thanks very much, Madam Director. And thanks for the question. I think a really important question and something we've been committed to throughout. I think it's important to remember that we have 3 main audiences when we build communication strategies. We're communicating with our staff and making sure that they're aware and know what's going on and they feel supported. We're communicating obviously with our parent community so that they can make decisions. And we're communicating with our students and making they understand. And the needs of those audiences are sometimes. So some of the things that we've focused on to get up to this point is thinking about what's the information that people need to make a decision and what's the information that has to follow, because practically speaking, there's just too much information for everybody to digest. And so how can we chunk some of that out and make it a little bit easier? And so while we work on this stage of messaging, we're also forward thinking to what's the next stage. Once I know whether I'm going to be in remote learning or learning at school, how do I navigate that? And so our emphasis in the next week to 10 days will be firming up what the plan is so people understand what the models look like. And we've been in conversation with public health. We've been in conversation with a couple of other experts about some parent information sessions, one around student well-being, one around public health guidelines. We've also talked about our own staff and our mental health advice. We heard Dr. Dushner the other night, and we've extracted her presentation from the meeting the other night to make a standalone video that we'll be sharing, working in partnership with some of our community agencies. CHEO late yesterday released a fantastic parent fact sheet that we will be sharing with our parent community and helping to do that. We're working on a series of infographics that will help to navigate some consistency in signage. And we've spent a lot of time working on our frequently asked questions, and we'll continue to go through those and pull that out and use the parent feedback to try and drive and employee feedback to try and drive our communications. I can't recall if I mentioned this already. We have some targeted areas where we know we need to meet the needs of particular groups. So as an example, a kindergarten video is something on our about how that will look, and we will do a video where we mock up a classroom. Give me about special education families and some of their unique needs and how we might tailor that. And the last piece I wanted to talk about is the difference between communication when it comes from the district and information from the district, and the relationship between the school principals and the school community and families. And so in the next couple of weeks, as principals and school staff come back, we'll really be focusing on building that school level connection. So I'm going to pause there. That's lots of information, but just gives you a sense of the range of things we're looking at.
Thank
Trustee
you.
Bell?
If I may, Trustee Scott, Chair Scott, I would like to just add, and I note that Executive Officer Giroux spoke very quickly because there was just so much to say, but I want to just put the rider that we are layering communication as we learn more, but the communication that trustees are sharing with us from the community is helping us to build the kind of communication that people need. And so it's very important that when we talk about targeting in the information, that we aren't actually just conjuring up what we think people need, but when we're hearing from trustees, when we're hearing from our community, that information provides us with data that tells us the nature of the information that is required. So while it is that the volume of communication that we've received in is difficult to be responding to individually, it is informing the big picture communication that we're doing. So I say that to suggest that people, while it is people aren't hearing from us individually necessarily all the time, we acknowledge receipt, but we don't necessarily always answer all the questions in detail, because it's simply not possible to do that and do the work within a finite amount of time. So we are using that as information, and we're not just kind of fabricating what we think people need to know.
Trustee Bell?
Okay, and so the follow-up last question then is, when it comes to teachers and ensuring that the teachers have the trust in the system to be in the classrooms, how are we working on that? How are we communicating in that regard?
So I will start, and I will ask Superintendent McCoy to follow. One of the things that we have been doing, and we've been doing it with the help of our communications team, communicating to our teams on a regular basis. So weekly, there's an update that goes to our employees. We have had, we look at and call upon our managers and our principals and vice principals to be key communicators for us. They have been called in more than once over the summer for full, albeit online meetings, where we've been able to talk through their role, and they have gotten to ask us questions about their own discrete teams and the questions that are emerging for them, because that is really the point of daily contact, but ensuring that our principals and our managers have the information that they are able to parlay. We try to sequence it in such a way that represents that people get a flow of information in a timely way, so that people aren't learning things out of sequence. We're not always able to achieve that. Sometimes we do fall out of sequence. And similarly, we would say that it's the same thing that is happening, moving from the province to the district. There are times when, myself as the director will learn something out of the typical sequence. So I will learn it from an employee or from a media, release or something, which is not the typical sequence that we expect. So there is, when things are moving fast, we don't always get it that way, but we do recognize that in order to ensure that our employees feel confident, we need to connect them with the person that they know, and we need to ensure that the person that they know is informed. And so working through senior team, the Directors Executive Council has already resumed its meetings as of a week and a half ago, because our superintendents play a role there as well. Superintendent McCoy, have I left anything out?
No, I think you've highlighted the most important piece, which is the building confidence in our managers and principals, who are the most connected to our staff in schools and central departments.
Trustee Bell?
Through you, Chair.
You have 4 seconds.
Through you, Chair. I am very grateful for all of the work being done behind the scenes and in public.
Thank you. Moving on then, I have Trustee Boothby next. Oh, Trustee Boothby, your hand has disappeared?
No, well, I took it down when we were voting early on. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks to my colleagues. Some of my questions have been asked, but I have lots more. So I want to go back and explore a little bit further. Trustee Schwartz was talking about the virtual classrooms. And I'm wondering, are we going to try with our virtual classrooms for families that have chosen remote to build virtual classrooms with children from the same school, and then we will only default to non kind of homeschool virtual classrooms when there just aren't enough children?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Certainly, when we put our minds to the best organization of children, that certainly would be ideal. We wouldn't be able to say that as a promise until we've seen what the patterns look like. When it is that we do start to look at any patterning of grouping students together, we do reflect that we do need to look at things like friend groups, family groups. We need to look at geographical pieces as we start to build. But truthfully, we are very much at the beginning of that contemplation, as that became a real contemplation yesterday. And so as we start to think about what are the pieces that we need to put together there, that certainly the well-being of the students that we're talking about certainly is informed. And we do that as a matter of course when we construct classes in any event. We put those kinds of things in mind. So as we start to contemplate doing, putting together what we will call our virtual classrooms, those are the kinds of considerations that we will certainly bring to bear. And of course, a sequence of priorities will follow.
Okay, thank you for that. With respect to the travel time, and I know Trustee Schwartz asked about this, but I'm concerned, and I did listen to what AD Reynolds said about this 75-minute after lunch being optional. But I'm concerned that it really does put certain children at a disadvantage, because it's not just the kids in specialty programs like IB and Gifted and Canterbury that have really difficult commutes. So my question is, have we considered making that a longer period of time, the commute period of time, and just moving everything, say, a half an hour in the afternoon schedule?
I will turn this question to AD Reynolds, as it's something that he's been working through with the operations team.
Thanks through you, Madam Chair. The model that we worked with was kind of a sample school of 9 to 3. Most schools don't have a daily schedule that's quite that tight. It tends to be more like 9 to 3:15, 9 to 3:20. So that does give us a little more flex time. We were working at the end of the day, kind of coming from what was the typical work day of our employees, our teachers, our support staff, and trying to stay within those regular confines. As we worked on finalizing each school schedule, we could see if we could stretch out a little bit, particularly for schools that have, as you said, students that are more likely traveling greater distances. Again, the model may very well be quite different in the near future anyway. But that was just a sample based on what seemed to be a relatable school day and not necessarily reflecting any specific school day. So there may be more time in there for that travel, and there'd be no reason why we couldn't do it if we can have the work day ended at a fairly reasonable time. It's just a lot of our employees have will have set up after school care and things of that nature that they're anticipating starting at about the same time that their regular school day ends. So we couldn't really go much beyond the closing bell time. That was the restraint with which we were working.
Okay, appreciate that understanding. So I'm wondering around OC Transpo. Do we know, is OC Transpo going to be running the 600 series buses again this year? And if they are, do we know, has OSTA been in discussion with them? And if we are going to continue with our current secondary model, is OC going to run 600 series buses for us at the noontime hour? Do they have that capacity?
So I'll ask CFO Carson, would you take that question, please?
Madam Chair, OSTA's been working with OC Transpo throughout the summer, letting them know what the variability of our plans would look like. They definitely are aware that they would need to put more equipment on at some of those midday times. They have not been able to make a commitment yet, but those discussions continue if that's the model we continue with. But it's been a matter of almost daily discussion. Okay,
thank you. So another question around the OC Transpo. So I understand now, as of last night, that the 100 maximum contacts is really only children's contacts within the school environment and really only considers additional students. But I have a bit of a concern that since OSTA, or I'm assuming OSTA is still going to run with the model, that a fair number of kids, their transportation is going to be OC Transpo. And particularly if we don't have 600 series buses, there's another whole group of unpredictable and different contacts that our high school students and frankly, some of our grade 7 and 8 students may be coming in contact. What's the best advice from public health around that?
So I think CFO Carson might take this, but as AD Reynolds has also been in touch with OPH, who might have some additional comments. So CFO Carson, please.
Madam Chair, OPH has spoken to us about the fact that when students are on OC Transpo or the students are walking to school, they need to be exercising all those safety measures we talk about all the time. with OC Transpo, a mask is mandatory. OC Transpo is carrying out its cleaning measures. We want people to respect physical distancing, and so those are the measures that are going to have to be supported by our guidance to students, parental guidance to students, and it has the same impact. Many of those students, when they leave at 3 o'clock, whether it's by OC Transpo or a yellow bus, will end up at an evening job. So we have to rely again on their ability to carry out all those safe practices that we've all been working with ourselves and our kids and our neighbors over the last few months.
Okay, thank you for that.
And Trustee Boothby, you're out of time.
Okay, I'll go back on the list then, please, if we get second time speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Lyra, I have you next. Trustee Lyra, are you there?
Yes, I am. I was trying to kill the echo. Okay, so my first question is yes or no. Public health recommends masks for children grades K to 3 and requires them for grades 4 to 12.
AD Reynolds, please.
I really just wanted to say yes or no. To be honest, I've not had a conversation with Ottawa Public Health around the masks for students K to 3 because it wasn't part of the provincial directive. We were really just focusing on masking grades 4 and up. So I did not engage in that conversation.
Okay. So my understanding is that they are recommended for grades K to 3. Does our board have the ability to create a board-wide dress code? Yes or no?
Yes, we have a dress code policy currently. We are looking at making revisions to it. So there was provision within the Act to create a dress code.
Okay. Is there anything explicitly forbidding the inclusion of a face covering in our dress code?
There is nothing explicitly forbidding the inclusion of a face covering.
All right, then I would like to put forward to my colleagues that we should be creating a dress code policy that requires a mask for grades K to 3. The recommendation from public health that grades K to 3 have one if they can or if they can manage, I think should be taken as instruction to us to create such a policy. We as educators have a great deal of understanding in how much we can get a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old to do. And I believe that we can teach them to wear masks and it would increase safety for everyone in the school. So I'm going to put a pin in that. I've got some more questions, but I will come back to it. So I have a question about physical activity without recess. What is our physical activity going to look like for the students who are at their desk the entire day?
I'll start the answer to the question, and Superintendent Towage will pick that up. We do know that a part of our recommendation is that as teachers program their day, they program physical activity into their day, preferably using outdoors. We do recognize that for our secondary students, that does represent a different kind of challenge because it is a different kind of instructional context. That said, we also do know that while it is our secondary students will be in classrooms and a classroom structure for the better part of a day, that they will not be in such a structure every day. And so as we continue to look at how it is that the pedagogy, you will recall at the beginning of this conversation, I spoke about the fact that as we think about the operational structures first, the safety first, that we will be rolling our attention into what kinds of content we will be looking at daily. And we do recognize that as has happened in the spring. We expect that it will happen in the fall, and some trustees have already acknowledged that our teachers have represented significant ingenuity in thinking about how it is to address some of those very important factors for their students within the confines of the parameters that they have. So we do anticipate some evidence-based and promising practices will emerge as we continue to go. When we say that we do need to look at physical movement during the day, that we will have recommendations not only through our own curriculum. We also have OFIA, which is a partner with education that makes recommendations, but I will turn that to Superintendent Tuwage, who will certainly enlighten us further on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to follow up on the comments from Director Williams-Taylor. So at the elementary level, our students will not be at their desk all day. We very clearly, from both the guidance to reopen Ontario schools and at the district level, they will have full access to the full breadth of the curriculum. That will include their regular physical education and daily physical activity programming. We are encouraging all of our educators to maximize outdoor learning, both from physical education outdoors and as well from a mental health support piece and learning outdoors. So that will not be a decrease to physical activity. It will in fact be an increase and an increase to outdoor learning. At the secondary level, we will be again focusing on outdoors for physical activity and for the physical education courses. Some of the courses are going to be modified and will need to be modified, but they will all be focusing on outdoor physical education. And of course, as Canadians, we are certainly able to focus on those areas. When we do need to access our indoor gym spaces, as the weather gets much colder, we will be complementing our indoor gym spaces, but again, maximizing outdoor gym spaces. Many of our elementary schools either have access to snowshoes, have access to skating rinks, at the secondary level through our outdoor education, cross-country skis, etc. So all of that will continue to be there to support outdoor education, physical education, and mental health through being in the outdoors.
Okay.
Thank you. Trustee Lara?
So I have a question about will students in high school taking a spare be considered full-time students on any given quadmester?
AD Reynolds, did you catch that question?
I think it was, is a high school student taking a spare in any given quadmester still considered a full-time student?
That's correct.
If they, over the course of the 2 quadmesters or the old semester, if they're still taking 3 or more, then they are still a full-time student despite any one quadmester load.
Okay. Have any of the OCDSB policies at the following been impacted? The ILC learning at the Youth Services Bureau drop-in, the William Hay Center, the Ottawa Children's Treatment Center, Reality Check, or any of our alternative sites? How are they being impacted by the pandemic?
So I think that through you, Madam Chair, some of these sites are attached to our additional facilities, if you will. I think Superintendent Simmons may be able to address some of those questions, but I think that there's a range here that you've identified that are attached to different aspects of our organization. So I'll turn it to Superintendent Simmons first. I don't believe that all of our senior team is on tonight, so I may be able to address some of the others myself. Go ahead, Superintendent Simmons.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, through you, I heard 2 of the programs, the William E. Hay Center and Ottawa Children's Treatment Center.
That was 2 of them.
So those are the 2 I know about. I didn't hear the other ones. I apologize, but as trustees may be aware, the William E. Hay Center is a detention center for youth, and they will be governing their own rules. However, the education portion of that is under the MF McHugh Education Center. And in our city, the MF McHugh Education Center is the administrative board is the Ottawa Catholic School Board. So they'll be working with those folks to determine what the delivery of the education program looks like. Having had the opportunity to visit the William E. Hay Center on a few occasions, there are opportunities to spread out and engage in distance learning, as well as physically distance learning, and also access to outdoor activity areas. Ottawa Children's Treatment Center is now known as CHEO School, and they are collaborating with CHEO, obviously, around safety protocols to have those students come back in order to engage in their learning protocols. So while we have a partnership with them, they are working with their own administrative bodies to develop protocols to ensure the health and safety of staff and students within those programs.
Okay. Yeah, I know we've gone to teachers to those, and I wanted to make sure that they weren't being canceled in light of the pandemic. I didn't hear about the Downtown Drop-In Youth Services Bureau ILC program or the alternate sites.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I think AD Reynolds might have a comment on some of those sites.
Yep, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, the Youth Services Bureau program is attached to the Richard Path alternate. It technically falls under the alternate umbrella. So they will be up and operating as we return to school. Obviously, they operate on slightly different schedules than our regular schools. They tend to have compressed days to begin with and lower cost ratios. So I know that Superintendent Smith and her team of principals and vice principals have been looking at how they may adapt those schedules to work within the requirements that we have from the ministry and public health to maximize learning opportunities for the students, both through the YSB drop-in and the alternate. So their schedules will likely look somewhat different, as they always have, trying to maximize in-person time where we can for those learners. Okay.
We also have staff who support homeschooling. Will those programs be continuing in the fall?
Superintendent Twage.
For you, Madam Chair, yes. So in terms of the parents that continue to opt for homeschooling, there are, and that of course runs through my department, there are a number of staff that they have a responsibility at various times during the year in terms of the monitoring and checking in with the families. Those processes will still take place. When they can take place virtually, they will. And if they are in person, they would be taking place with the appropriate PPE.
Okay. How much time do I have left?
You have about 20 seconds left.
Okay. I'd like to go back on the list, and I intend to try and move an amendment to our dress code as a motion soon.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. Remembering that this is a special board meeting and we need unanimous consent to add substantive matters to the agenda for debate. This may not be the best meeting to do that. It might be better to give notice tonight and do it at a different meeting, but let you think about that and move on then to Trustee Campbell.
Whoops, there we go, thank you. Well, I have to say, I'll really try to make good use of my 3 minutes. It might be the only 3 minutes I get, so forgive me, folks, if I will try to talk quickly. So first of all, I have to say that I think I'm going to have a much less strenuous evening this evening than I'd imagined. I really appreciate not only my colleagues' questions, which have taken a lot of my questions away, but also, quite frankly, the staff preambles and explanations, which are not only frank and sincere, but very helpful. I very much appreciate the recognition of the comms oversight. I think this is the appropriate kind of messaging to be giving to the public. If we drop the ball, we need to recognize we dropped the ball. And that's absolute, I think, leadership. And I think that especially appreciate the director's view in terms of the messaging. The messaging out to the public will be, this is under construction. We're doing our very best. Bear with us, right? And I think that's absolutely on the mark. This won't be perfect, but I think our messaging has to reflect that. We can't pretend implacably that everything's fine because we figured it out. And I think that is really going to be key in terms of gaining public trust with respect to our plans going forward. But I appreciate that's the approach, and I think that's the correct one for what that's worth. I do have some questions, though. Obviously, I'll try and fit some of the key ones in. The director has suggested that we may be able to open safely, but maybe a lot of pieces are not in place for early September. But I do have a question, because it's been raised several times to me today as well, that there may be really perhaps even too much workload on a lot of our key staff. And while we may be able to open schools in September, I guess from the director, I'd like to know, are we really looking at overstraining our staff unreasonably in a heroic effort to try and open for September? Or do we really need, per Trustee Schwartz, to be thinking of sending a letter to the province? So that's my first question.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell, and through you, Madam Chair. Certainly, it is the purview of trustees to determine if that is a step that they wish to undertake. When it is that we think about what it is that we need to do for our community, we will recall the meetings that we had back, I believe it was on July the 22nd, when we had a significant contingency of stakeholders who presented their perspectives on the importance of reopening. So we recognize that as a part of the ecosystem of Ottawa, the communities in Ottawa, that we really need to galvanize our very best effort, no matter what it takes, to try to get our schools ready to safely engage our students and to bring our students in. So we truly have not put our minds to looking at an option 2 opening. What we are putting our minds to is how to ensure that that opening is safe. Again, that said, we do recognize that it is the trustee used the term a heroic effort. I'm certainly not going to categorize myself as a hero, but I will say to you that the heroism is in the part of our custodial teams, in the part of our educator teams, and certainly the senior team has put unfathomable hours in and will continue to do so, because September 3rd is only the beginning. It is not the end. It is the opening of the door, and I would submit to you that the 6 weeks following September the 3rd will be very, very busy because we will be learning, we will be shifting, we will be pivoting, we will be building, because September the 3rd is only the pathway to the opening of the door. There is much more to do. So again, from a political perspective, certainly I defer to the perspectives of the trustees about the outreach to the ministry, but we take the direction from the ministry that it is the expectation that we open on September the 3rd, and it is our commitment to do our very best to ensure that as much that can be in place will be in place, but at the very least that every safety option is on board and ready.
Very much appreciate that, and I got to shake my head, but because I don't know what to say. But a related concern, I guess, with respect to the opening is, in fact, our as well our comms out to the community, the demand survey, which closes still at Sunday. We're all privileged here this evening to be hearing these excellent additional explanations, but a lot of parents are not so privileged, may or may not be able to engage by Sunday. So I guess I'm quite concerned about how we're going to be treating the demand survey results, what reliability we're going to be able to place on them for our planning, and as well, what's the default condition for parents if they either haven't got their form in by Sunday evening, or tell us Monday morning, well, if only I'd known about virtual classes, or only I'd known about the high school situation, I would have chosen X. So I guess I'm really not understanding how we're going to handle that. So it sort of goes to my start of school question, but it's a different question.
Director?
Thank you, Chair Scott. And I do appreciate that question because it's a question we ask ourselves as well. We have essentially what we have is a chicken or egg situation. You know, if it is that we knew if we knew how many people that we were going to attend or we were going to be serving, we would know how to essentially set the table. And you know, but the other piece of it is that maybe if we set the table the right way, then more people will attend. And so trying to ensure that we are ready to serve. This is a tool that we're using to try to figure that out. That said, the question is how flexible can the tool be, and how flexible are the results, and how reliable are the results? Those are questions we continue to ask ourselves. We have continued to check in with other jurisdictions about the nature of their results, because we were not first. And so other jurisdictions, believe it or not, have actually delivered and completed and collected their data. And so we've been trying to seek out now with the changes that have been occurring, what are those jurisdictions doing to adjust to that information to their communities, and whether that will have an impact on the data they receive. And again, that work has been just undertaken today. So from my part anyway, reaching out through code contacts. So I will ask Executive Officer Giroux to actually talk about what she knows so far about our uptake, because that is something she's been monitoring, because that is actually the base of this question, is how many people have actually responded, what is the gap that we have, and would those folks be responding differently, and what kinds of flexibilities we need to have. So I'll turn it to Executive Officer Giroux as she has more granular information pertaining to the tool.
So we've been monitoring the survey responses all week. In the first, I would say 2 hours, we had a tremendous response, and we currently have responses for 49,875 students. So we've got a pretty good response rate. When we look at the distribution of that, 33,370 elementary responses. These numbers were mid-afternoon today, and about 16,145 secondary responses. So that's proportionately a pretty good representation of our elementary versus secondary community. We have been working through the data all week, because one of the things we want to be able to do at the end of the process, or that we wanted to be able to do, particularly when students were going to be tied with their community school, was say to schools, these are the students who chose in-home, these are the students who chose remote, and these are the students from whom we have not yet heard, so that we could navigate a path forward. As we look forward, based on the information in the PPM, what we'll need to do with that data now is think about what is the number who've chosen remote, and how does that impact the replanning of schools. To make sure that we can expedite the use of the data as quickly as possible, we have been doing some testing on it, including testing for validity. Well, we know we have some parents who have completed a couple of times because they've changed their mind. Most of those folks have reached out to us. We've only got a fairly small percentage of what we think might be double counting, less than 1,000 potentially. And we also know that with every reminder, we see a significant increase in the number of responses. So we haven't yet had a conversation about what happens now with the change in the PPM and how will that impact it. But either way, I think the data will be critical to helping us inform some of the next steps. You heard some conversation tonight about restaffing or scheduling, or could we group kids from the same school together in a remote learning environment. Those are the kinds of things that even the preliminary look at the data will help us to do. So there is still tremendous value in the data that we'll receive by Sunday night. And, you know, we may need to do some additional follow-up depending on what comes in the next week. But this data, I think, will help us to move forward, and that will bring some clarity to some of the questions that the trustees in the community are asking. And
thank you, Thank you, Executive Officer Giroux. And Trustee Campbell, you are out of time. And for your information, Trustee Boothby, I do have you on my list for a second time, but that's going to be for, not for a while. And I have Trustee Ellis next.
Trustee Chair Scott, can put me back, please? Thank you.
That is done. Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. I'm going to start with some specific to my area. I'm wondering how Ottawa Technical Secondary School will be impacted with this. Are they being considered a regular high school, or might we have some options there because of the nature of that school to extend it, be a little different?
AD Reynolds, please.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, because it is staffed differently and already has a maximum class size in most cases of approximately 17 students, it might be possible, and also a small student population that is not in the congregated special education classes. It may be possible to come up with an alternate schedule that allows those students to be in school more often. Superintendent Farish and the principals of those two sites have been speaking this week to see what those options are, and hope to present a model again based along the principles and the tenets of the Ministry Guideline Public Health and what the overall model looks like.
Thank you. I know there's a fairly significant link program at that school. Are we looking to get that up and running, or is that sort of on the back burner for a while?
Link as in adult?
The language for adult language.
I haven't been taking a look at the link program. I don't know. I don't think Superintendent Baker is here. I'm not sure if anyone has an answer readily available.
I'll follow up offline.
Okay, thank you very much.
And the other sort of, well, I guess if I can get a quick comment on Canterbury and how I've been hearing some concerns, not concerns, but questions as how some of the arts will be delivered there. Particularly, some of the arts lend themselves to more individual, but other of the arts have strong group components, orchestra, that kind of thing. Just a quick comment, if I could.
Sure, and I'll start with that one. Some of the performing arts that might lead themselves to the use of, say, change rooms or special areas like instrumental music, we're going to have to take a good look at because of the safety protocols that are in place. Change room and using a change room automatically becomes close contacts, and so we just have to develop some protocols around that.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, I know others have questions.
Fair enough.
So when parents ask me, I say, well, that's yet to be developed. Yes. And that kind of thing.
Yes,
okay, thank you.
It is.
And if I can get a quick comment on how the adult high school will be dealing with this.
Again, I know Superintendent Smith has been working with Principal Whitehead. They do plan to open. They do plan to serve students. It's really a question of class sizing and cohorting. They often start off the year with larger than usual class sizes because of just the nature of the population and changes there. We are looking at it, but I don't. The specifics haven't been ironed out yet. And again, the model continues to change somewhat.
Okay, thank you. Going to change my direction. I'd like to explore some of the HVAC ventilation issues. CFO Carson mentioned that our HVAC systems are up to code. I'm wondering, are there other ventilation criterias being brought in specifically for COVID? And if not, is the board, I suppose I'm trying to understand, it was mentioned that we'll look at rooms once they're loaded to see how they're doing. I'm just wondering a little more information for parents because there is a concern out there about ventilation. And I think it would be helpful for parents if they understood how we will, what our criterias are and how we will put them in place and modify what's there so that they can feel confident that their children are in a well-ventilated situation.
Madam Chair, I'll try to be brief. We've been working with other school boards as well, looking at the standards from ASHRAE, which is one of the world standard setting organizations, trying to look at what their recommendations are. We've been talking to Ottawa Public Health on an ongoing basis, and everyone recognizes that not all buildings are capable of moving to the most immediate standards. And so that's why there will be alternate processes in place. We are moving towards, the best part about air exchange is to maximize the flow of fresh air. That is what the systems are being optimized for. If we find that that isn't working, upon consultation with whether it's our occupational health and safety people or with OPH, then we will take a look at whether those classes need to be relocated. But in our work with Ottawa Public Health, they are satisfied with the progress we're working towards. As was said earlier, they don't approve. They certainly point us in directions and have been suggesting that we need to areas they want us to look at, but they are looking at it as part of the overall selection of tools we're using, along with the masking and everything else.
So are we, just so everyone understands, as the folks in facilities who have that expertise, are we sort of responding if there's calls from say a principal, or if parents have concerns, for testing and seeing how we can get it up? I mean, will this be an ongoing evaluation and remediation?
Madam Chair, at the moment we're getting, like everyone, we're getting lots and lots of letters of concern, and that's why we've had to develop some templates to respond to those people. Where a principal has brought to our attention a concern that's been historic in an area, we've gone back to make sure what impact that will be with respect to COVID. And we are looking at what kind of monitoring we will be able to do on an ongoing basis. And some of that will in fact be tied to the ongoing monitoring with OPH of any cases that might occur in a school or in that part of the city. So it is something we're looking at. We have to be able to, we won't be able to respond to every individual query we get from parents, but we are certainly working closely with the principals to make sure we can address concerns as they're brought forward.
Thank you. And how much time do I have, Chair?
You have 33 seconds.
Okay. I'd like to explore quickly, after 15 days of a student being absent from a school, they're taken off the rolls. I can envision with having to quarantine, and then if a case comes up, a student may be away from school for 15. Are we looking at that 15-day and having some? I know the director said we're trying not to be bureaucratic around this. Can we not be bureaucratic around this as well? Thank you.
Trustee Ellis. And one of the things that's really important here is that we do recognize that there are going to be lots of things around attendance where we need to attend to the needs of families and the realities of families in a very granular way. So you talked about the absence and taking off roll and all those kinds of things. But we have also contemplated the fact that there will be delays every day with students getting to school on time. For a variety of different reasons because of this situation. And so we have to be very reflective and responsive. And so I agree with you, Trustee Ellis, that as we start to look at our usual practices, we need to be very contemplative of how we can be flexible and responsive so that we are not disadvantaging students. That was the goal. That is the spirit and intent for the whole building of this approach to schooling in the fall. We have said it before, we'll say it again. This is not business as usual. And so we certainly, while we're trying to build some routine for our students, we do recognize that this is not a routine scenario. So I've said it before in terms of your questions, because it's something that you have brought forward many times. And I will repeat it for the benefit of community, that we are committed to being responsive and at the school level, making adjustments as they are appropriate in the interest and the spirit of essentially bringing our kids back together safely and recognizing the unusual circumstances.
And when we're done,
Trustee Ellis, you are out of time.
Okay. When we're done here, we need to look at this 15-day because it is not, it's an equity issue as well. Thank you. Put me back on.
And
I probably
that's
won't
a
get to
good
speak
point.
again, but
that's a good point, and I see that Director is making a note. Moving on then to Trustee Jenkins. We can't hear you. You're still muted.
There, that darn mute button. Thanks, Chair Scott. And thank you, Director Williams-Taylor and Associate Director Reynolds and the senior staff. I appreciate Director Williams-Taylor's commitment to safety first, pedagogy second, and instructions third. I think it's important for us as a board to gain the trust of our parents and students. And I think Trustee Bell also mentioned talking about trust. I think the biggest challenge is the fear of the unknown. So as Executive Officer Giroux mentioned, the videos, I think if we continually to communicate with our families, we'll relieve that fear of the unknown and gain the trust of our students. And so the videos will be a big help. So I appreciate that. Thank you. A lot of my colleagues have already asked the broader question, so I'm going to be a little bit more specific. At the elementary level, actually Trustee Boothby mentioned this, I do have a number of families who would like to see their children's friends be placed in the same remote learning class. So that seems to be a popular theme here this evening. So hopefully that we're able to address that and help our families so that they stay within their social bubbles. My other question is parking at the primary level. How are we going to address the challenges at some of the busier schools where the busing is, kids are dropped off. Now parents are going to be dropping off their students. And let's say a family has a child in kindergarten and a child in, let's say, grade 2. How are we going to address or give confidence to that parent who can't enter the school? How can they, safely drop off their children in the morning? So that's my first question.
Madam Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, I will turn this question to Superintendent Tawage, as she has put great thought to that very question, particularly as it pertains to our youngest learners. Superintendent Tawage, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, as mentioned by Director Williams-Taylor, we haven't just been working with principals this past week. We have had a group of 23 principals and vice principals that have worked with us since April. We started to think about the planning back to school. The other thing which is important, we aren't the first province in Ontario to return to school. So we had the opportunity to reach out and to learn from the provinces that did go back either in May and June. What is common in those areas is they had very identified areas for parents in terms of drop-off areas. If you are dropping off by car, where parents would line up staggered, staff waiting for them. Where do you enter if you're a walker? Where do you come in if you're busing? We've set up the entire structure operationally with our principals and vice principals. This will be clearly communicated to our parent community and specific to the actual site. Obviously, depending on the site, it has different implications in terms of where parents will come. The other thing I did want to mention, because you said, how will parents feel confident? Remember that we're really going to focus on using of videos as part of our key communication at a personal level, whether it's a slideshow or a video at the school level. And for all of our kindergarten parents, especially our year 1 kindergarten students, they will still have the opportunity to have the virtual intake with their educators, and we will have personalized videos just for kindergarten for that experience as well. Because we know of all of our parents, those are our parents that will be counting us on the most to give us examples virtually of what the school day will look like, where do they stand, where do they come, and what will the class day experience look like.
Thank you for that, because absolutely routine and confidence are the two things that our young students will need. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Although I did, you know, we talked about outdoor classrooms for our primary students and secondary students. And I'm just imagining some of the schools in my zone, certainly some of them are in busy areas. And so, I can't imagine, you talked about cross-country skiing perhaps, or, other physical opportunities. Chapman Mills, I'm thinking of that school in particular. I'm not sure where they're going to do cross-country skiing out there. And I'm sure we can be flexible and innovative in terms of that, but I do believe it will be a challenge for that. Thank you for that. So at the secondary level though, Trustee Ellis talked about Canterbury High School, but I also had a parent asking me the same question. So is the specialized arts program, normally I guess it runs full year, will it be quadmestered along with the core? How's that going to work for the specialized arts program?
AD Reynolds is poised to respond.
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. In all likelihood, yes, it would be quad-mastered. In fact, some of the arts programs, like visual arts, often did change partway through the semester into a different area of instruction. So in some aspects, it'll fit fairly well. In some of the models we're looking at with the longer instructional period, whether it's 1 or 2 a day, one in our current model, things such as dance and some of the performance-based arts could do very well, as they'll have more time to engage in those kinds of activities. So at this point, don't see any reason why the arts program will run, and I can't see any reason why it wouldn't fit into the models we're looking at across schools, maybe with a little bit of tweaking.
All right, thank you for that, Associate Director.
And Trustee Jennings,
yes?
You are out of time, I'm afraid.
Really? Wow.
Really?
Thank you.
Moving on then to Student Trustee Chen.
Actually, can you put me back on the list? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to begin by saying a huge thank you to everyone at the OCDSB for working so hard to ensure a smooth transition back to school for students. And Student Trustee Liu and I have also had students reach out to us from our school board, wishing us to help them express their appreciation for all the staff at OCDSB. Your hard work does not go on unnoticed. And so I would like to begin by, through you, Madam Chair, I would like to clarify the rationale for half days in the secondary schedule. So is that because it's for the safety of the students to ensure minimal contact between transitions in between classes?
Associate Director.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. There were a few things that came together in coming up with that. First, and this is in no particular order, safety being the number one thing. Secondly, had to look at what we could do within the current collective agreement in terms of teacher assignments, and also looking at the other requirements that existed within the various guidance and direction we received, including trying to limit contact between contact direct and indirect to a group of no more than 100 for secondary students, as well as it was strongly encouraged that we provide a synchronous learning opportunity to those students who weren't in school that day. So when you combined all those factors together, that's what led us, as well as I think 16 other districts, large districts across the province, to that one period in person, then an extended one period in person, then a dismissal to avoid, as you said, the transition in the hallways, the need for lunch, which just can drastically increase cross-cohort contact, even with supervision in the building. And it also then would allow for an afternoon common remote synchronous period for all students in all cohorts to participate together, which was something that the guidance document had recommended. So within what we were able to allocate in terms of teacher instructional time. So all those things came together into the recommended model.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I would like to ask if there is a possibility that the OCDSB is currently considering changing the secondary model to be a full day, because there are other designated school boards in Ontario that also run a hybrid model for secondary courses, secondary classes, such as the Thames Valley District School Board that do a full day schedule. And a full day would be better for students who need in-person support, such as from educational assistance, and many students learn better in person. So I would just like to hear your thoughts about that.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. We are looking at those. We may receive some direction, and we are receiving direction that would suggest that we may need to look at changing models. I have had an opportunity, thanks to the director, to take a look at the Thames Valley model. There are some things about it certainly that would work. Aspects of it were similar to an earlier model we were considering, but we do have to continue to wrap our heads around what that common lunch period would look like. Even in a typical school of 1,000, there would be approximately 500 students in the building on any given day. So we do have to consider that with the supervision that we have available. As well, it would not permit that synchronous opportunity as readily for students at home. There may be some options, but it becomes a little more challenging to deliver that. As well, the Thames model would seem to require some perhaps stretching of the interpretation of the collective agreement at this point, and we haven't had those conversations with our federation partners. And one of the things we're very mindful of is we certainly hope to whatever model we land on, have it one where our teaching and support staff feel that they have also been heard in the development of the model, and feel that it is something that they are comfortable with. So we're striving to attain all those goals. But the short answer is yes, we are looking at that.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
You actually have 1 minute and 45 seconds.
All right. And through you, I would like to ask, how would virtual schools apply with different secondary students in different streams or programs, such as classes in the IB program, the AP program, as well as gifted?
Associate Director.
Okay, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. For those programs, it would be particularly challenging. We've really just started taking a look at that following the release of PPM 164. You're right. If we have X number of students from across our district, each one of our secondary schools offers French immersion, English, academic, applied, open courses, university, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then several of those have optional programs within those as well. Optional tech programs, optional art, optional social science, and then some of the enhanced programs you discussed, such as advanced placement and IB. It may not be possible to offer a fully remote virtual learning opportunity for students and still honor all those programs. For example, in order to teach IB programs, you have to be an IB certified teacher, which requires a fair bit of training delivered by IBO Canada and the international organization. It simply may not be possible to have trained IB teachers in that fully virtual learning environment. It's going to depend on a number of factors as we take a look at the students opting for remote learning, which we don't have those numbers yet, seeing what type of courses and grade levels and streams and programs that they are currently in, and how best we can try to accommodate that in a learning environment. So there's a strong likelihood that students opting for a fully remote learning experience may not be able to have a program for that looks exactly like what they would currently have in their homeschool.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, can students be deliberate about the sequence of courses that they choose? So can we make it so that phys ed courses are scheduled later in later quadrimesters, so that when then that's more likely for it to be in class full time, so they would have a different experience?
Who's taking that?
I'll go ahead with that one as well. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So When you schedule a secondary school, you also have to match teachers on your staff and their areas of qualification with the courses that you're hoping to offer. So it really wouldn't be possible to say move all of your physical education or technological studies courses into the second semester, because in that semester, those qualified teachers can teach no more than 3 courses in a semester, and yet we're obligated to give them a full working load, of course, or whatever their contract status is. We need to give them that much work, and we can only do so really within their areas of qualification for the most part. So, you know, we will. That's not the only restriction. There are others as well. I'd also just like to remind that we are starting an adaptive, but it doesn't mean that we're going to remain an adaptive necessarily. You know, depending on how things happen in our community and how the rates of spread, you know, hopefully decrease, we could return to conventional earlier than anticipated. We could also see, you know, the removal of some of the potential health and safety restrictions that would alter those courses in the near future if things continue to go well. So we wouldn't want to start moving students around between semesters and changing courses, only to find out, optimistically, within a matter of weeks or months perhaps, that we're able to return to more regular learning, even if it is an adaptive model. Again, we may move out of an adaptive model, and then all the other things that I was beginning to get to that are the complexities of scheduling a secondary school. So again, that was a long answer to get to the shorter one, which is no, we're not at this point looking at on any kind of a large scale moving those courses into later in the year, because also just because we do, it doesn't mean that we necessarily know what the second half of the school year will look like either.
Student Trustee Chen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to ask, this one was heavily requested by students. How are you going to split students into the different cohorts? So are you going to use alphabetical order or another method?
Through you, Madam Chair, we're looking at alphabetical strongly. We would have to take a look across grade levels, across program streams, and across the entire school. We think for purposes of clarity, it's best if it's done school by school. And if a school community knows that cohort A for school X is students A through K and cohort B is L through, you know, we think that we want to reduce some of the complexities as much as possible. I know, having those conversations at home, my son, who is going to grade 11, has already done the quick calculation and realized that he will only be likely be in a cohort with only one of his friends, while the other 5 happen to be in the other cohort. So I'm under considerable pressure here to look at other models. But at this time, we think alphabetical is probably the most straightforward way to proceed.
Student Trustee
Helps
Chen.
to keep households together too. Sorry, that was just the other thing. It does help to ensure that households remain part of the same cohort for the most
part. Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. In terms of equity for special education, how will we ensure that students with IEPs will have their provisions in their IEP met?
And I think I see Superintendent Simmons popping up there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely, the expectation is that the accommodations and modifications noted in individual education plans continue to be implemented. There are going to be some accommodations that can't be reasonably implemented for students who choose remote learning, for example. Things like students who have access to a scribe, as an example, documented in their IEP. We aren't in a position to be able to send staff into homes to provide scribing for that purpose. So when those situations arise, school teams will work with the affected families and, where appropriate, the student to try to develop accommodations that will help support that student. So in the example I gave with respect to scribing, it may be a situation where we look at assistive technology and speech to text software, or perhaps using video or those kinds of things to try to meet the goals as documented in the IEP.
Student Trustee Chen, did you have another question?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Could you please address the transmission risk of educational assistants rotating through schools?
I think that one goes back to Superintendent Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are in conversations with Ottawa Public Health around that. We do have a variety of staff, not just educational assistants, but also itinerant staff who travel between schools. Right now, we're working on minimizing the number of schools that a staff member will go to on a given day where possible. And of course, taking a close look at personal protective equipment as they get from school to school so that we're minimizing the risk or the possibility of transmission.
Student Trustee Chen, you still have a small number of seconds left.
Oh, thank you. And through Madam Chair, I would like to ask the last question, which is, how do grade 12 students get marks for the courses they need for university program application deadlines in January under quadmesters and octomesters?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. That is an excellent question. What we saw through the earlier phases of the pandemic management from the province was that the province worked very closely with the post-secondary institutions, as well as the college and university application centers, to make sure that their procedures and requirements were reflective of the reality in the province, and they were receptive to that. I would anticipate that we will see conversations at that level happening again as we head into the fall. I just don't think that it has happened yet, but I think everyone will be very committed and interested in ensuring that those students who are looking to move off to post-secondary studies at the end of this year will not be disadvantaged unnecessarily.
Thank you.
And I think you are just about out of time there, and I move on to Student Trustee Liu.
Hello, so Charles and I both actually prepared those 7 questions together, hoping to like blaze through them as efficiently as possible. So I'm really happy that Charles was able to get through all of them. So I am done speaking essentially. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have been very well organized tonight. That brings me then to Trustee Penny.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll just be quick. I was asked by a friend teacher of mine how PPM 164 that specifies 180 minutes of synchronous learning today for a kindergarten and 225 minutes of synchronous learning for a grade 1 and 2, how that's going to work. And if you guys have any concerns about that, when you think about how synchronous learning is sort of defined, you know, for a kindergarten to sit in front of a screen for that amount of time, just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Superintendent Toy.
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry about that. I had an echo, so I didn't hear. Thank you, Trustee Penny. And like you, when we did see the required minutes for our youngest learners, kindergarten and primary, we did very eagerly read the PPM to see flexibility within what was defined within synchronous learning. Because we always do look at as well what the national screen time requirements are. When you actually go through in details with the 8 pages in the PPM, you'll see that it's a lot greater flexibility within that piece, including some indirect learning with the teacher supervising, with various tasks. There is an example given, for example, with those minutes to have a 10-minute start up to the day, and a 10-minute end to the day with the kindergarten children together to create those structures around opening exercises, such as singing of O Canada, which we would normally do within a school, which is very much part of a regular kindergarten experience. But what's important to be aware of, and I'm really pleased about in the PPM, and that's for our parents of kindergarten children and our parents, especially for our, I think about our grade 1 students, they do have the opportunity to opt out of some of the components of those synchronous requirements. So within remote learning, if a parent decides that those minutes are too high for their child, they will have the opportunity to do that and to make that decision at a family level. But we are absolutely, with our instructional coaches and our early years team, working through examples of what some really positive activities for children would be, and that would be very much developmentally appropriate. But again, we would agree those are quite high minutes. And so we're looking at ways that some of those would be more DPA, active movement. And as you can imagine, a kindergarten child can't log on by themselves. So the parent or guardian would be there. So it might be an opportunity for that parent or guardian to engage with us with that a little bit of movement as well, as part of that synchronous learning.
Okay, thank you. Are we concerned that if parents choose to opt out, that the child might be, the students, especially the younger ones, would be left behind to a certain extent?
Through you, Madam Chair, if the parent chooses to opt out of some of the synchronous requirements, because we are required to take attendance during that period, we are required as a school board to provide that learning through an asynchronous opportunity. So that learning would still be available to the child. And there are examples within the PPM that we will work through, whether it's print examples that we would then provide. So we are looking already at some developmental options for our youngest learners within the requirements of our PPM. And we will ensure that there would be learning opportunities that would be print-based, and so the children would still have that access to support. And it's very important for all of our parents in in a remote learning environment to know they have access to the educator for the full instructional day. So even if they did choose to opt out of some of those synchronous pieces, they would be able to access the materials that would be supported. And if they have questions, they would have the availability of the educator, just like they would have in a regular traditional classroom.
Okay, thank you very much. The appearance of the sample schedule the last few days that we did have was a very enlightening measure, shall we say. And I'm just wondering, I know it is sort of thrust upon us very rapidly today, but is there any idea when new sample schedules for both the face-to-face and the remote learning for secondary students might be available? This is very important to parents to help them plan. And I don't need an exact day, but is it like a week? Is it like the day before school starts? Could you just give me, let me know?
Trustee Reynolds, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, Trustee Penny. I would have liked to have thought that the one that we provided would be the one. And I guess all I'm saying is we'll get at it tomorrow or Sunday to start trying to put together what that schedule may look like. We'll need to involve some of our principals and vice principals, have conversations with Federation partners just to make sure we're thinking of everything. Maybe get some further direction or input from the ministry or other colleagues. We would hope to have, and again, our principals and vice principals are also, and teaching staff are also just desperate for this information so they can start organizing for the start of the school year. And we want to get together as soon as possible. It's certainly not in our interests in any way not to have those questions answered and made very clear. So hopefully this week, hopefully we don't hear something afterwards that causes us to need to change it again. But we'll do our best to once we have some decisions landed, we'll start communicating those out.
Okay, and thank you very much. I'm really sorry to ask the hard questions, but I know that the trustees will be asked them. So thank you very much for that answer. For students who choose the face-to-face option, they will supposedly have both a face-to-face or in-school and remote sessions still. But what is our thinking with regards to trying to make sure they have a consistent teaching experience in, a subject that is both taught face-to-face and remotely? Like, I know it's probably impossible to have the same teacher, but the consistency is going to be very important, and I've been asked that by parents. So.
Thank you. If I can just clarify, so are you saying for those that opt for in person, they are neither, as we've been discussed, cohort A and C, and then A and B, and then the cohort C group, or the group who opts for full remote? What sort of consistency in terms of experience we could expect between those groups?
No, like they'll have like, say, subject number one, a face experience with a teacher, and then they'll, at some time later, they'll have a remote experience on that same subject, right? I'm just wondering, that seems to me to could be difficult for some students if there's two different teachers on the same subject. So
in the model we're working with presently, it was the same subject teacher who would be delivering the synchronous opportunity in the afternoon. So yeah, we were doing one class in the morning in person, and then another class remotely in the afternoon, and then we'd flip the next day. So it was for all the students in regardless of cohort, they had the same subject teacher. So for cohorts A and B, the ones that are opting for in person, they will have the bulk of their support from I think in any model that we may go to, from their assigned classroom teacher, as they would in say a normal return to school. But there may be opportunities for support from other teachers with qualification who may not be the regular teacher, but that would be more in addition to, not in lieu of.
Okay, that's very good news for a lot of parents. I guess my last question is, have we done any thinking about the protocol when there is a outbreak in a classroom, and what we're going to do? That's a very complex question, I know, and I just parents really want to know if thinking in depth about it and what some of our thoughts are.
Sure, thank you. Certainly, we have been told that there will be some specific guidance coming from the provincial level, both from the Ministry of Health and the Chief Medical Officer and the Ministry of Education. And they do want to see some consistency across jurisdictions in that regard. So we can't necessarily communicate anything in terms of detail until we receive that direction, which we believe to be coming shortly within this week. That being said, we certainly have been having those conversations regularly with Ottawa Public Health, as they do now. If we have a positive case, they will do the investigation as they typically do, and they will reach out and contact those people that they believe may have been in close contact, and will provide some some direction. So normal protocols will certainly be followed in the event of a positive case. In the event of multiple positive cases that might be approaching, I think, what a lot of people think of as an outbreak, we would hope not to. One of the advantages of cohorting as tightly as possible, limiting contact as tightly as possible, may mean catching something fairly quickly, limiting the number of close contacts, and really maybe just having smaller groups of people being directed to self-isolate and things of that nature before it gets to the point of where you're shutting down, say, whole classes, whole grades, whole schools. But those protocols are coming from the province. And then once we see those, we'll be able to issue Ottawa specific. And one of the positive things coming out of all this is the degree of collaboration. CAO, Ottawa Public Health, and the 4 districts have been engaged in these conversations and hope to have virtually identical process so that the community knows exactly what to expect regardless of where their children attend school.
Well, that's good. That's the first I've heard of CHEO, so that's good news. Anyway, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving up your Friday night. I know that I'd rather be doing something else on Friday night other than having a meeting, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Penny. And Trustee Huff, I have you next.
Good evening, all. I want to start by thanking staff again, as all of my colleagues have, for the hard work that has been going on at the office. I'd also like to say that it's been, very clear in our communications. Some of us have been speaking to the media, that we're feeling, and I think I'm hearing through this entire meeting tonight, that we're still really being unfairly played by the province here in the delay of information to us. I can't imagine sitting in the position that you are right now, waiting still for directives and direction at this point in these decisions. I have the auspicious privilege of sitting as the last of the line of trustees, I think, on the first round of questions. So I've got a very sundry pile of things that I'm going to pick up on because my colleagues have covered a lot of the major ones. I'm just going to start first on following up with what Trustee Penny was just talking about the procedures and decisions for closing. I think that, or changing the dynamic of classes in the case of an outbreak. That is something that has been very repeatedly communicated to me, that parents want to know what will happen if there's an outbreak, what will the procedures be. And I think that in keeping with what we were talking about the communication strategy, that it might be very clear to say that at this point in time, we're still waiting for specific direction on that, and it will be forthcoming as soon as possible, that this is definitely being discussed and will be communicated to parents as soon as they have it. I think that's really important. I'm going to start in my questions here about the PD days that we have. We have 3 PD days rolling around before the start of school comes up. And if you can give us a sense of what the content of that 3 days of PD will be in terms of preparing the teachers for the start of school, that would be really helpful to start there.
Through you, Madam Chair, I pressed something wrong here. Through you, Madam Chair, we actually did receive a guidance document from the ministry on that, and so the ministry has in fact developed an entire sequence of professional learning for our staff, with the parameters around the expectations for who should attend, and it includes a significant menu that ranges from health and safety items to anti-racism and anti-oppression, which is the launch of a year-long series, along with the new math curriculum. And so there are further kind of details to it. But that is essentially the content of the day, of the 3 days. And they have developed materials to go with that outline that allows itself to some local adjustment, but with an expectation of key principles being hit.
My follow-up question to that then would be, what proportion of that time do you see as being actually spent on preparation for the opening of school and covering of safety protocol?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say to you that from the point of view of percentage time, I would be loath to reach out to that, because while it is, I do have a sense of what the content is. The actual proportional timelines for the content is beyond me at the moment. I haven't read through in that granular detail, but I can tell you that the health and safety components of it will go into some of the protocols that are expected, and an expectation for staff understanding. I would also submit, however, that just like with every other kind of professional learning, the professional learning module and the opportunity to learn is theoretical and hypothetical for sure. That it's truly going to be in the practice, that it's going to allow people to really internalize some of these new approaches. And so certainly, as we talked about with a progressive entry, we talked about the reason for that. Part of the reason for that is to add time for practice. And that is it, again, the whole idea of having our principals, having our vice principals actively engaged in that. And interestingly, while it is that we talk about that for health and safety, I would say to you that, and Superintendent Twage is here and a very excited proponent of job embedded learning, will say to you that all aspects of what that training is going to look like over those 3 days will require ongoing training and ongoing practice in order for it to be embedded as a habit of mind. So certainly 3 days is not a magic bullet, but it is certainly going to be the foundation for the expectations so that people understand what the expectations are, what they look like, and then it's going to be through practice and supervision and collegial support, peer-to-peer, to get some of those things right.
I think that actually frames my concern the most. It seems that we're really proposing a model here where the learning is going to take place by the time the kids have arrived. The practice, the theory is going to be taken into practice with the kids in situ. And I personally would feel a whole lot better with another 2 days, 3 days a week of the adults working out the system before the kids show up at the door. I'm really, I'm really shocked by this. And I'm certainly getting this message as well from a lot of families and from teachers saying, we need more time to set up our classrooms. We need more time to figure out on a local level how this is going to happen. So I guess that leads to the question of, I mean, you've answered the question already, saying that at this point in time, we follow the directive of the minister in terms of the opening date of school. But I put the question out there, if a board as big as the OCDSB said, we need 5 more days to get this ready. If we put a motion on the floor tonight that said that we want 5 more days or 2 weeks, whatever it be, would that be any pressure on the minister to reconsider the possibility of changing the start of school? BC has changed the start of school. Why are we not entertaining this if our teachers and our families are saying that anxiety levels would be brought down if they felt that things were a little bit more worked out? I'm putting that forward, and I hate to be sand in people's undergarments, but I really feel strongly that we need to have an opportunity to put all of this planning into practice before we have the children there as guinea pigs.
Thank you, Trustee Huff. You are out of time, but if the director has a comment in response to that, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate the sentiment with which that thought has been brought forward. I am cognizant, however, and I do agree that, of course, greater practice and more time for practice does certainly improve practice. I do recognize that we do have some purview to slow down entry through a progressive entry, and one of the contemplations certainly is perhaps elongating that progressive entry, because one of the things I'm also cognizant of from an equity point of view is that we have some families that are desperate for school to start. We heard from multiple families who came and spoke a month ago almost about the fact that the engagement of their children back at school is absolutely essential for them to work. So we do recognize that we do have to balance the needs of our communities, and so I'm cognizant and conscious that while for some people a delay in the start would be welcome, there are some people for whom it would be disastrous, and so I'm trying to balance those things. And we hear that when we close schools because of inclement weather, right? So when we close the school because of inclement weather, it's a safety issue, it's a safety matter, but we hear from some of our very vulnerable communities that without school, it affects income, well-being, and so forth, and the stability of families. And so it's always that balance. And we think that there may be a way to use the opportunity to extend progressive entry, to give some time to practice in a less pressed situation, in a less fulsome situation, while still considering some of our most vulnerable families, our most vulnerable communities, and some of those that we heard from. So I do recognize the point that's being made, and it's not to say to you, I started by saying that time is a limited resource that is not our friend these days. And of course, more time is always welcome. But I also do recognize that the realities that some of us experience are not necessarily reflective of some of the realities of some of our families who may not activate their voices as readily. So I just want to kind of situate that as the 2 pieces to consider as we think about those opportunities.
Thank you so much for those comments on that. I really appreciate it. Madam Chair, if I could please go back on the list. The very long list.
The list of second-time speakers is nearly as long as the list of first-time speakers, and I am the only first-time speaker who has not yet spoken. Many of you have asked questions that I would have asked myself, and I very much appreciate that. So rather than asking questions, I just want to make a comment here in terms of where we are and where things are going forward. It's been very clear that there are still a lot of unknowns from the minister. Certainly this afternoon, when he appeared with the Premier for the daily news conference, he was asked a question about delaying the start of school. Stuck to the idea that the first week could be used for staggered entries. When pressed, said, well, maybe if a board came to us with a very, very good reason, we would consider more than that. But I think that the question always has to come back to what exactly is our purpose and what do we expect to accomplish by that kind of a change. And so that brings me to a couple of things. Number one is that we don't actually need a motion to write letters to the minister. If you want me to write a letter and there's consensus around it, I will quite happily write letters. Number two is that there may be some things which sort of count as policy decisions. The issue of mandating masks for kindergarten students to grade 3 certainly was raised earlier tonight. And whether that would represent a policy change or whether it's a one-off motion, because we don't really know if we want to change our permanent policy on that, but certainly that would be the kind of thing that might well merit a board decision. Tonight is probably not quite the time to do that because we do have additional information that we would want to have in front of us, I think, for making such a decision. But if anybody has ideas like that and motions that they are thinking of putting forward, and give us some notice tonight, or work with staff to develop language for those motions, certainly I'm prepared to call a meeting where we can deal with those motions if we don't already have a meeting on our schedule, which would be an appropriate time to do it. I really appreciate the efforts that staff have made to be so responsive to all of our questions tonight. And with that, I will move on to our second round, and my first second round speaker is Trustee Bell.
Thank you.
Trustee Scott, I think I was on the second time list and I was before Trustee Bell.
Yeah, that's what I was.
I don't remember you asking to be on the second time.
I did. I asked at the very end if I could be please put on, well, and you said there's been 100 minutes ahead of you.
The witness to that, we will give you the second time, and I'm going to limit people to 2 minutes because we've got a lot of people on for a second time.
Appreciate that, Trustee Scott. Trustee Bell, are you okay with me going before you?
Go for it.
Thank you. So I wanted to get back to sort of the situation at Colonel By in particular with octomestering. And I still haven't really received a strong response, I guess, or a compelling argument as to why that school is going to be different from the quad mestering that's going to be taking place at other secondary schools. So if I could please get a response to that, because I still don't understand how, particularly for a grade 12 student, that is going to work.
AD Reynolds, would you take the question, please?
Sure. Thank you through you, Madam Chair. I may need some clarification on that. Being a year-long school, one of the reasons why they were shifted or remained in a year-long pattern is because IBO requires what they refer to as concurrency of learning, that learning is not, that a course is not done and ended at one point in the year and doesn't continue throughout the rest of the year, as I understand it. So there is, I believe, a requirement in the IB certification that courses continue throughout the year. Octomestering was a way to keep the cohorts limited and yet allow the course to be taught in both half of the years and thus fulfilling that requirement. I don't know if that answers your question.
Trustee Schwartz?
Yeah, I mean, it partly answers the question, except that you have many students at that school that are local kids and are in a regular program and not a specialized program. So I think if we need to have octomestering for IB, then we need to look seriously at doing quadmestering for the remainder of the students. And I don't know if that's possible to do, but I think we do need to consider that. I'd also like to find out what the online situation will be then, because if we're going to virtual schools, how are Colonel By students then in a virtual school in a octomestering system, but potentially in a quadmestered virtual school?
So we'd only be going to a virtual school for those students that elect to learn fully remotely. If we have to go to remote learning for our regular schools, they would stay within the structures in which they are in, but all students would then be home learning remotely. If students opt to go to the full virtual learning experience, they may not be able to continue in IB because there are other requirements that would have to be approved by IBO before a new virtual learning school could be considered an IB school. So that may not become quite so important or become the dominant issue. Back to what you were saying before, that would be kind of akin to having Colonel By operate on any given year, despite what is happening now, in a blend of year-long and semestering systems, which has been discussed, but would be challenging to implement as both teachers and to a certain degree students don't take classes or teach classes discretely in the IB program or in the other program. You have teachers who may teach a non-IB history and also teach an IB history. So if you were to divide them into two different levels of delivery, two different modes of delivery, then students nor teachers, because we also have students in the IB program taking classes not in IB, and so you get that blending, then they would have to be, that would have to be stopped. And that would be, I think, a fairly significant change in practice and expectations for that community. So it would require some more looking at.
Okay, I appreciate that, AD Reynolds. I think I'm hearing a lot from the Colonel By community, both the IB program families as well as the non-IB, about the serious concerns about octomestering. And I do ask that maybe we rethink whether this year is the year to do that, or whether we should actually do quadmestering, as we're likely not going to be returning to sort of regular school year this year in any case. My last quick question, I really do want to make this quick. I want to understand how schools like Carson Grove, which have sort of movable walls, there's no real walls in place. How is that going to work for kids in sort of these cohorts when basically the entire school is one big school?
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have a number of schools that where we have the dreaded open concept conversation, and we do know that there's some structures that we are trying to put in place to create barriers. I'm going to ask Superintendent Twage to speak to that, because that is an item that she's addressed at more, or has contemplated for more than one of our schools.
Through you, Madam Chair, we have been working with Superintendent Carson and Sandra Lloyd in terms of looking at the options we have, not only for those schools that are in open concept, but also for our youngest learners where masking is not part of the guidance document. So as I shared, in all kindergarten classrooms in our district, we will have structures that will be on all of the tables to support them when they're in either learning or eating. For all grade 1 to 3 classrooms in our districts, we have purchased desk shields for all students, and we are in the process of of collecting data from all of our principals, where we have those situations where we have more of an open concept, and we have ordered additional shields for those environments as part of our return to school plan.
Very good. Thank you very much for that answer. That gives me a lot of comfort. I appreciate hearing how that's going to be dealt with. That's it for me. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Trustee Schwartz. Trustee Belden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. I will be quick. My question to you, Chair, is it possible for us to write a public letter to Dr. Vera Etches, Ottawa Public Health, similarly along the lines as the letter that the Toronto School Board has just received from their Public Health Authority, outlining physical distancing and class size recommendations for Toronto, regional equity approaches, and advice for marginalized communities, and asking her about masks and face covering. Just for your information, Toronto has, the public health has strongly recommended masks for kindergarten to grade 3 in the letter that was just sent to their board. Question, Chair, can we?
We could potentially write such a letter. It would be useful to actually be able to see the text of the Toronto letter if you've got it anywhere.
I have it on Twitter. I just retweeted it. I don't know if that helps you.
That doesn't help me.
Well, this is the letter back from their Public Health Authority, which outlines their recommendations on the areas that I've outlined.
So what Toronto did was write and ask specifically for the recommendations?
I'm not sure what the background was, but I'm assuming that we could ask for that for our local recommendations along the same lines.
Certainly, I would be willing to contemplate writing such a letter to ask Ottawa Public Health for some questions. Since we don't have what Toronto actually said or wrote at this point of time, I'm sure the director and I could do a little investigating and find out exactly what has happened there. But certainly that would be something that could be contemplated. And if we have the information, I would be able to bring it back to trustees and make sure that whatever we were sending, there was consensus that that was what we wanted to raise.
Thank you, Chair. And given the time constraints, would we be able to do that very quickly? Or would it be worthwhile to get a show of hands of trustees that would like us to undertake something like this to see if we have consensus right now?
Certainly, in terms of the broad concept of getting additional, of writing and asking OPH for some specific guidance on aspects like that. Trustees who are interested in doing that, put your hand up, please. And I'm seeing a whole bunch of hands. So I think that broadly speaking, we do have consensus that it would be useful to send such a letter. And as I say, we will. It probably can't be done until Monday, but we can do some digging and get probably a draft out to make sure that the questions we're asking are the questions that were intended.
Okay, and then just 2 quick questions. How will we support parents when they support their children online? Will we tell them what the curriculum is? Will we give them an idea of what they're learning for the online component? And please confirm that play-based learning in kindergarten will be a priority.
And Superintendent Tuwage has just popped up. She's psychic, I think, and doesn't need me or the director to tell her when she's needed.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, to the most recent question around play-based learning. That is the fundamental component of the kindergarten curriculum. There will be adjustments, as you can imagine. And then the first question, I do apologize as to what was the first part of your question, Trustee Bell?
Supporting parents for those that choose to undertake online learning?
Absolutely. Superintendent Lehman and I have been texting as to what are some of the structures in terms of both from a technology perspective and also from what does the learning look like for the year. We do have our instructional coaches who have been working throughout the summer to create some scope and sequences around what are the big ideas that they're learning for the students. And so we thankfully are a district that has instructional coaches that will be able to both support our teachers around remote learning and in the classroom and our parents. So as an example for the new math curriculum, we are looking at creating our own parent guides to have a real simple way of what does the learning look like and what are the key things and what are the kind of prompts parents can use in their regular conversation. So absolutely, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I move on to Trustee Boothby.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions that are very similar. So I'm wondering how we're addressing the teachers' concerns around technology for them to be delivering the synchronous portion of their learning. So things like reliable internet, reliable equipment.
Madam Director?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I do believe that, yes, Superintendent Lehman is here, and I'll turn that question to Superintendent Lehman.
Good. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, Trustee Boothby. We had a similar question last night from one of the delegates, I believe. And so one of the things that I did mention is that we've done a couple of things. One, we've done some wireless upgrades within our schools. Now, not every school has been upgraded as of this year, but we did know that there would be greater demand within our schools for broadband. So what we did do related to that is we purchased some Ethernet adapters, and those Ethernet adapters will assist our teachers in using those with their Chromebooks in order to become hardwired. And as those become hardwired, they will ensure or increase the reliability of our Wi-Fi. So that is something that that we've done. They will be in shortly, those adapters, and they will be distributed to schools to support our educators.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. With respect to portables, how does the square footage compare in portables with our average sort of classrooms? And do we have to take additional measures or have additional concerns about our children and our staff who are teaching in portables?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, we've lost CFO Carson at this point. He's no longer with our meeting. I'm not sure if AD Reynolds is prepared to respond to a question like that because square footage is not something I'm particularly familiar with. AD Reynolds?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I think I can actually, because of some of the site visits we've done. From what I understand, a typical classroom square footage is around 750 square feet. Portable is around 740 square feet. There are some differences in that the hooks or cubby area is at the back of the portable, which is kind of an entry in and out area, which does restrict that a little bit. But generally speaking, based on our consultation with public health, no, it doesn't require any particular measures above what we would have in a classroom, other than ensuring, single file entry, good hand sanitization when they enter, and then maintaining that 1 meter plus physical distancing inside. As was mentioned earlier, there is ordering of some acrylic type barriers or shields. If we did get into an area where a classroom size was smaller than we would like for maintaining that physical distancing, we could put in some of those physical measures to enhance safety in those spaces.
Okay, thank you for that. With respect to LSTs, LRTs, are we anticipating that we're going to need to deploy or otherwise divert our LSTs and other special education staff in order to cover off the need for additional teaching class, additional teachers for additional classes that we may need to make sure that our classrooms aren't 30, 32 children. What's our thinking right now? Are we still going to be able to use LSTs and LRTs the way we're using them now, or are they going to effectively become part of our teaching group, our in-classroom teaching group?
Madam Chair, Superintendent Simmons is poised to respond. I just want to preamble his response by I use the term spirit and intent and driven by certain principles. And we do know that we already talked about building our programming around our most vulnerable student. And so while it is that all things are on the table, we do also need to signal that we certainly do recognize that our students who have IEPs and who have particular needs that have been identified do require particular resources that we are committed to providing. That said, I'll turn the floor to Superintendent Simmons, who will take us a little deeper in that answer in a very short order.
Well, thank you, Madam Director and Madam Chair. Through you, I'm not sure I have anything beyond that response to offer. We know that our priority is serving our students with special education needs, and we will be doing our best to honor IEPs, as I responded in a question earlier. So at this point, I think that sums up a response.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, obviously, I'll be looking for as much detail as we can, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more in the SEAC meeting next week, but I appreciate that. And my last question is, will any of our students be able to engage in lab or other hands-on learning, like chemistry labs, shop, technology classes? What's happening with like our SHISMs?
Through you, Chair, Superintendent Tuage may be able to respond to the question, as there has been some guidance in the documents around how we are doing some of our hands-on pieces, like music and labs. Superintendent Tuage.
Through you, Madam Chair, we are very committed to ensuring that all of our students in all of our course and our pathways have access to curriculum. The reality is we will have to modify what it looks like. And so we do have a 13-page document at the secondary level across all courses that will show some of the modifications that will be required. Rather than, as an example, we would have all of the students working on one car or all of the students engaged in the same lab. The reality is that we will be looking at how do we ensure that we are cleaning our equipment? How are we ensuring that we are using gizmos and demonstrations? But yes, our students will have access to hands-on learning, but it will be modified, and it is our hope with great decisions across the city of Ottawa that we will be able to reduce some of these precautions as we work through. But the start of the year, as identified by our director, our number one focus is on our safety, and that will be our number one driver.
Okay, thank you. And again, I just want to add my voice of thanks. And it is clear to me through this meeting that staff has done an enormous amount of really thoughtful work on this. And I really appreciate all the long hours. And I know we don't have complete answers to everything, but I really appreciate how much work and how far this plan has progressed, particularly given how often the landscape has been shifting for you. That's all for me, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Boothby. I next have Trustee Lyra, and we are almost at 10:30. Trustee Lyra?
Why don't we take the 10:30 vote, because I have a bunch of questions and I'd rather not get cut off midway.
And I have still got 4 people as second-time speakers on my list. So if everybody could please just put their hands down for a moment. Trustee Huff, Trustee Jenkins, your hands are currently up. And having done that, I will ask if who is willing to continue past 10:30. We need 2/3. And at the moment, I believe, Trustee Ellis, are you still with us? Yes, you are. And Trustee Fisher, are you with us or not? I don't see Trustee Fisher. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we do have enough to continue past 10:30, but I will ask you to please be mindful. It is a Friday night. We have some staff who have been amazingly willing to stay with us tonight. So we're still on 2 minutes. Trustee Lara.
If a parent opts to send their child to online classes, will the board retain the per student funding? Or will the school retain the per student funding?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. As I said, CFO Carson has departed, but it is my understanding that yes, it is that those students continue to be our students, and we are funded for those students.
Okay. We heard that on September 3rd, transportation might not be safe. Who is going to make that decision? And if it isn't, what is our plan?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. We are in conversation with OSTA. OSTA is working through that process and will be providing us with an update about the plan for transportation once it is that we are able to communicate exactly what our structures are going to be. Because while it is that we do know what the structure for elementary will be, at the moment, we do recognize that there is a possible shift for secondary. And so that will reflect some shift in their planning. So we do anticipate that OSTA will be communicating directly as they have confirmed their timeline and their planning.
All right. What is the plan to deal with 30 students in a small space eating lunch at the same time with all of their masks off?
Thank you again, and through you, Madam Chair. That is a question that we are grappling with because, of course, the spaces are different. We do know that we don't anticipate having 30 students in a small space, at least not as a regular occurrence. But that said, the trustee is correct that students obviously will be removing their mask, and they will be in the space for some period of time as they have their nutrition break. I will turn to Superintendent or to AD Reynolds for additional thinking, as I think that is a conversation that has been going and changing. And so I don't have a definitive answer except to say that it is being contemplated, but I think more detail AD Reynolds might be able to provide.
Sure, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So at the secondary level, we're returning an adaptive, so we'll only have half the students in there at any given time. If we do end up having a lunch period, we probably won't be using common spaces. At the elementary level, it's very rare to have a class in a small space of 30. It's rare to have a class of 30. I don't know if Superintendent Tuwaish has any further comment on what that would look like at the elementary level in terms of nutrition breaks and managing perhaps some of our larger classes.
Through you, Madam Chair, all of our students at elementary would be eating at a minimum of a distance of 1 meter, which is what is in the reopening guide. And as always, our students are seated and they're in their homeroom and supervised. And so that would apply at our kindergarten through grade 8 levels.
The reason I ask is because Hopewell usually has classes of 28, 29, 30, 31 in its grade 7 and 8 French programs, and it's got some fairly small classrooms. It's kind of an old building, and I don't think there's 30 square meters in the classroom to put them all 1 meter apart.
Through you, Madam Chair, one of the things that we have already had multiple meetings, as you can imagine, with our school administrators. And our first focus that we did share is that we look at the size of the cohort of the students. Once we find out how many of our students will be remaining in a learning in person mode, and that we select our largest spaces specifically for them. The example of Hopewell, I can certainly speak familiarly with. I taught at that school. And so some of the spaces that we would not typically use because we would use a rotary model at the grade 7 and 8 level are now full classrooms and accessible. So we would have the opportunity to use all of those rooms if we needed to space out, as you gave as an example when it comes to eating, or to use those larger spaces which would normally be used for a specialist rotation model for larger classrooms and for eating. So those are all of the factors that we are looking based on the guidance we've received from Ottawa Public Health.
I'm going to save my motion about introducing masks for grades 1 to 3 or K to 3 until the meeting that has been put forward by the chair. So thank you all for staying so late. Thank you all for your very hard work. I look forward to the future answers.
G. Campbell, I have you next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be really brief and concise. Quick question. It was talked to earlier. Parents will want to know when will we be able to, or do we even know that, be able to pronounce clearly on lock-in in terms of option selection for parents and defaulting if they have not, for those on 72 plus thousand, inevitably we'll see quite a few who just don't declare. When will we see that, or do we know even yet?
Through you, Chair, that is something that we have been discussing since one of the things trustees have raised very clearly is the concern about communities not having enough information or feeling some ambivalence and so forth. We do already have a significant return rate, and so we hope that this return will continue into Sunday night. But we also have some contingencies around reminders and then follow up through our principals, because these are students who are registered with us. And so we will be able to see who we haven't heard from and so do some follow up there. So our goal is to work towards getting to that 100%. I think that one of the things that the trustee is also asking is that whole piece around going in and changing your mind and that kind of piece. We do expect that is going to occur. Like I said before, this is not a perfect science. And so the piece around locked in, we do recognize that there has to be some flexibility. How it is that we have defined that flexibility is a good question. Because that continues. We're trying to balance between the stability and reliability of the data and flexibility and responsiveness to the community. So I can't say to you that we have a formula in place, except to say that we are calling on the community for as best as possible to be as stable in its response as it can be, and recognizing that what we're moving into is a time where we are looking at your choice being a longer choice, simply because now the ability to shift from one platform to another is somewhat more limited, but we do recognize that there needs to be a level of flexibility for discrete cases. So that's the best answer I could provide at this particular time. I think that we would probably be able to update better next week as we get closer to exactly what the details of the design will look like.
Thank you very much. Moving on very quickly. My understanding is, was it through the PPM or additional dialogue with ministry representatives that it was made clear that the ministry doubled down, if I have that right, on more of a 50-50 model for secondary schools?
Well, we do know, through you, Chair, we do know that yesterday the minister made an unequivocal statement when he spoke in response to this very question. The reporter asked the question, 16 out of 24 schools, school boards have gone in this direction. Is this in line with the ministry direction? And the minister answered, no, we are committed to 50%. And then in follow up with other school boards over the course of today regarding that very question, the dialogue that evolved was that it was becoming clearer and clearer that that 50% model is indeed the expectation.
Thank you. So has anything substantive changed apart from perhaps the increased adamancy, if that's a word, from the ministry? Has the ministry urged any reinterpretation or provided any new ideas? Has anything actually materially changed?
I would have to go and look at all of the different communications that we received last night and today. But my inclination is to suggest no. And my inclination would be to suggest that it is a question of how it is that some of the materials have been interpreted. Our student trustees raised one of the school boards because, as I said, it's 16 out of 24, which means that 8 did not go that way, the way that we had gone and others. And so there is a question around some of the interpretive factors. So that is what we're trying to understand, is what are the aspects of the interpretation, or what are the structures that have brought those school boards closer to the parameter and still met the 50% marker that has been communicated. So we are endeavoring to learn that, but nothing has come directly to us pertaining to that.
I appreciate it. I have other questions, more to do with OPH. Sorry, I can't thank you long enough. I don't have seconds. I have questions vis-a-vis OPH minima, but I think if we are going to get a letter off to OPH, maybe my questions will be covered there. But I guess what I'd like to also suggest is that, given that the time sensitivity of this, not just for trustees, but honestly for staff and everybody else, is letters can fail, or maybe the right question isn't asked in a letter. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, it would be nice also, not necessarily expecting that, it'd be wonderful if it could occur that Dr. Etches could be invited back perhaps for Tuesday, and that way perhaps she could give color. Maybe a return letter is not required. Maybe she could give color to follow-up questions if something wasn't clear, etc. So maybe that's something could be proposed as well. And anything else along those lines, I guess I'll reserve till Tuesday, and we'll see what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Moving on then, I have 2 more second-time speakers. Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Just continuing with the safety protocols, will teachers be provided with masks and face shields?
Through you, Madam Chair, the answer to that is that teachers will be provided, education workers as well as educators will be provided with PPE as appropriate. I will turn to Superintendent McCoy, who can provide a little bit more illuminating detail to that.
Thank you, Madam Director, and through you, Madam Chair. All our school-based staff will be provided with disposable medical grade masks for every day, as well as a reusable face shield. The expectation is that they will wear the masks at all times, and the face shields as appropriate when they're working in proximity or closer proximity with students. In addition, additional PPE will be provided. So, for example, gowns and gloves as appropriate to the nature of the work that's being performed by the different employee groups.
Thank you, Superintendent McCoy. Will there be school-based clubs resuming, or will that be something that'll be later in January?
Madam Chair, I could speak to that preliminarily. We know that schools are invited and encouraged to establish virtual co-curricular activities if it is possible, because we do know it is a part of the culture of school life. Field trips will be suspended at this time, as will any large gatherings and certainly overseas travel outside of the district will not be contemplated at this point. As for how long that will be, a part of my reasoned thinking about that would be to essentially plan for the better part of the year, because should we even be coming back to something that looks quasi-normal anytime during the school year, I will anticipate that there will be continued direction around caution, and so unwise to create circumstances where students are gathering in close quarters in unnecessary ways. So I think it will be a slow return to anything that looks like normal for co-curricular, extracurricular. And we do know that through the provincial recommendations, as well as through our district, we do support extracurricular, but in a virtual platform.
Thank you, Director, for that. Actually, my next question is for Superintendent Simmons. Will there be online sections of gifted classes offered?
Madam Chair, through you, in our current model, those students who are enrolled in our gifted program would be receiving whatever courses are in Block A and C. So if those are gifted courses, they would be offered online with additional support.
Thank you. And just to reconfirm with you, Superintendent Simmons, I do have a number of parents whose children, students do have the IEPs, and they're concerned with struggling remotely, but they're also, for the ones that are going to be in class, they can, they're fairly independent, but they still need that support. So can I reassure parents whose children have the IEPs, will there be enough support in class for them to be successful?
Madam Chair, through you, as I mentioned earlier, one of our key priorities throughout this is supporting our most vulnerable learners, and that includes students with an individual education plan. Within the individual education plan, there are a list of accommodations, modifications, supports that are in place, and we'll do our best to absolutely honor those. In some cases, as I mentioned earlier, it may not necessarily be possible in a fully remote learning environment to provide all the accommodations that are in place. And in those situations, school teams and staff members will work directly with families and students where appropriate to develop reasonable accommodations that can be applied in a virtual or remote learning environment.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Did you have something else, Trustee Jennings?
Yes, that darn mute button.
You're almost out of time.
Okay, I'll be quick. How confident are we that in terms of cleaning supplies, I think it was brought up the other night that there was a little bit concern. Are we confident that we will be continuing receiving enough supplies to support our schools with cleaning solutions, hand sanitizers, PPE? Are we confident?
And Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say we're as confident as we can be. I know that the expectation is a supply into September to start, with the expectation of a continued replenishing. I do know that the materials are more available now than they were in the spring. And so there's a growing confidence around the availability and the delivery of these materials. And the target is for a full September supply. In terms of the continued supply, it is planned. And we believe that as this mechanism starts to roll, that it will roll with some continuity. So at this point, we have every reason to believe that that is the case. We have more confidence now in that than we did say 3 months ago, based on our past experience.
Thank you, Director. And one quick last question, if I have time. if parents decide within the first week or two that, if they've chosen the remote learning direction or if they've chosen in class, within the first couple of weeks, can we reassure them that they can change their minds?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say to you that as the model is emerging with a more discrete remote learning structure, that capacity to quickly swing from one to the other is diminished because with a virtual learning classroom that is staffed for a full classroom, when a child or when a parent decides that a child should return to full school, the school that they are assigned to also has those classrooms staffed to capacity. So while it is that our initial thinking had been to keep students attached to a particular classroom at elementary so that the return would be smoother, as we are now seeing that a virtual structure is likely the structure that we will all have to be using, that switch is not going to be as seamless. We will probably be recommending natural reporting times. So progress reports for elementary school students come in November. First term ends at the end of January, I believe, as well as for end of first semester. But we also know for the secondary school students, the quadmesters represent somewhat of a natural timeline, although again, reentry will be complicated. So it is, as I said, and I continue to say that while we continue to be responsive and try to work with our families as much as possible, I also, in all honesty and clarity, would want to say that it is not a straightforward move, and it is not likely that a reentry will be directly to where families left from. So, they won't necessarily be coming back to the teacher that they may have expected, or, so that's the caution that I would share, but that is a reality. And I have been certainly exploring this with my colleagues who are exploring similar models, and that unfortunate reality continues to be the case elsewhere.
Thank you, Director. All right, thank you.
And that moves us on to Trustee Hoff, who is our last on my list.
I'm going to talk really, really fast this time. I'm going to ask, I think, 3 questions, and they're little ones now. So we're on to the little ones. I have a concern. I want to pick up on the piece that Trustee Jenkins brought up about the dropping off of children. My question is about safety in the schoolyard for the first while, especially while transportation may be questionably safe. If parents decide that they're going to drive children to school, do we have manpower in place, or has there been thought put in place about additional crossing guards, additional safety measures for that increased traffic for the pedestrians as they come into the school?
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly the quick answer to that is yes, thought has been given to all of those pieces. So the supervision in the yard, the crossing guards, so all of those pieces. But of course, operationalizing those pieces, a lot of those things are in the works, right? One of the things that we do know is that we will be giving guidance to our families around who are escorting students to school through a walking school bus or through dropping their children off, to drop them off as close to bell time as possible so that that lingering in the schoolyard is reduced. And we do also recognize too that we have some work to do around our busing situation, and so working with OSTA. So the Ottawa Student Transportation Authority is certainly not just looking at loading buses and dropping kids off, but the whole transportation picture, and has been putting their minds to what kind of advice they're providing to families about the efficiency and safety of getting to school. And we have certainly turned our minds to what that entry into the schoolyard and then progressively into the school will look like, to maintain distance, to be supervised, and to be safe. And this is where, in answer to Trustee Ellis's earlier question, where I talked about the whole idea of recognizing that attendance timelines, we need to be considerate and considering attendance timelines, because when we have all of these staggered entries into school, certainly we're going to see some interruption and disruption of our usual attendance protocols, and we have put our minds to what that will look like as well.
Yeah, I'm equally concerned about the connection between vehicular traffic and pedestrian traffic as I am to physical distancing in lineups at the school. I remember drop-off days when my kids were in elementary school. My next question or concern is about our goal to use outdoor learning as much as possible, to use outdoor classrooms, to outdoor physical education. And I'm a little bit concerned about some of our more disadvantaged families who may or may not have appropriate outdoor winter clothing to sustain longer periods of time outside for phys ed, because I don't think that has been really a part of the curriculums in the past. So has there been any consideration about those factors?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We started this conversation. We'll continue the conversation. We'll probably close the conversation with a focus on our most vulnerable students, and our vulnerable communities. And so we do recognize that we do need to be attentive to things that we would typically assume. And so we do know that working with our Education Foundation, the foundation has been remarkable in projecting and being proactive around areas of need. So putting our minds not only to issues of dress and materials for outdoor activity, but also to consider that for our students that we have working remotely at home, who do come from some schools and some situations where they need further assistance. We need to think about materials. We need to think about materials that they can use at home that people assume will just readily be there. And we learned that through our foundation in the spring. And so I have spoken on more than one occasion about building on the things that we've learned. So to your point, Trustee Huff, when we think about making assumptions about what students need, I'm very proud to say that our principals have been very active on that case. They have been asking those questions already, and some of them have actually been proactive in preparing for receiving students in a way that their needs are met. So we have considered, and we're continuing to consider, but it's not just at the senior team level. We are seeing that right on the ground.
That's fabulous, and that just gives me a great deal of comfort. So thank you very much on that.
And we have only about 4 minutes left here.
Last quick question. So good timing. So if we're going to be doing some outdoor work with the kids, we're going to be using some outdoor classroom time. I certainly know that my children during their education have used their devices a great deal during class for looking things up. What is our access to internet? What is our range of that internet access outside of the school building if kids need to be accessing internet outside on their devices?
Thank you, through Madam Chair. I will call on Superintendent Lehman because I see that he is still with us. So Superintendent Lehman, would you care to comment, please?
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair, and thanks for the question. That is something, Trustee Huff, that there is some access around the perimeter of the building. To the extent that that would move beyond, an extreme distance, and I know buildings vary from building to building, so that certainly would have to be a consideration for us, and it would be something that we would take back and have that conversation with Business and Learning Technologies to see if that range could be expanded, certainly at all. So certainly, we would look at that, but we would also look at it as an opportunity as well, I think, for there to be some experience, potentially without the use of the device outside as well, right? So we're trying to balance those, certainly those types of things, but we will certainly take that in consideration and gather some additional information.
Thank you all for your time and your patience here on this Friday night. Thank you so very much.
And that brings us to the end of our agenda. Again, on behalf of all trustees, huge thanks to staff for hanging in with us, and staff who were here for part of the evening and gave us great support. I do think that it is time to do some clapping. I wish we could, in addition to doing the clapping, give you guys just really a whole couple of days just plain off. All of us, the director and I were speaking the other day, and I think all of us, like many people in our community, the COVID thing is getting to us a bit. And the term I coined for her was that we were suffering variously from mental hyperventilation, because we clearly needed to put paper bags over our heads so that we could just settle ourselves down again. But I think tonight has demonstrated that in spite of that, there are antidotes, mainly in the form of solid information, which make us feel significantly calmer and much less likely to mentally hyperventilate. So that may be a better solution than the paper bag. And with that, I will declare our meeting adjourned. And again, thank you. And please get some, go to bed tonight and sleep well, because you've earned it.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night.
Good night, Mary Ellen. Good night, John Boy.
Thank you, Michael, because we haven't met before. And thank you again, as always, Sandy and Diane and everybody else who hangs in till the very last minute. We really do appreciate your quiet background support.